So I'd like to introduce the speaker for our next session. We have been seeing signs in North Dakota that the state has truly been embracing an all-of-the-above energy approach with strong investments in both traditional and in renewable resources. John DiDonato is the Vice President of Renewable Development for NextEra Energy Resources, which has more than 80 wind sites throughout the U.S. and Canada. More than a dozen of those sites are right here in North Dakota. John has been involved in energy development projects throughout the U.S. since joining NextEra in 2000 and comes today to discuss the future of wind energy development in North Dakota. John?
Thank you very, very much. I have been here for a long time. I've been working in North Dakota since about 2002, and I've seen a lot of change, mostly really good, by the way. It's good to talk about all of the above because I think that when we see that done in national politics, it seems to be a very nice tagline and not a lot is done about it, or it's something that deflects criticism from one technology to the other. But in North Dakota, it actually really is. North Dakota is the embodiment of all of the above. You know, the state has been producing electricity from coal for almost 100 years. And by the way, cheap coal, mine mouth coal, the type of coal that in any environment should continue to operate. And you should be proud of that. Natural gas coming out of the ground since the early 70s. The Bakken is one of those places where you can still extract gas and oil. Should be the opposite, oil and then gas, reasonably cheap, and continue to thrive there. And there's ethanol here, there's wind. And we happen to be the entity that has tried to harvest the wind for the benefit of North Dakotans and frankly our shareholders as well. We had the first commercial wind farm in 2003 come online, and since then we've had over a dozen and we have a couple more on the books. We've invested $2.5 billion in this state. There's well over $2.8 billion in wind invested in this state. Most of our investment is in wind, but we're also in oil and gas to boot. We're very proud of all of that. But today I thought I'd share just a few facts very quickly about the wind industry, particularly in North Dakota, and then move on to the meat of what I'd like to talk about. It's been 15 or 20 years since wind has been growing in the state. And in that time, North Dakota has hosted now over 30 wind farms. 30 wind farms, about 2,600 megawatts of wind generation in this state. There's about 3,200 megawatts of coal in this state, just to give you a calibration there. And I would argue that the economic boost provided by wind has made North Dakota both stronger and certainly diversified its economy. North Dakota is the 5th largest producer of wind energy in the United States, and most of that gets exported. North Dakotans have been proud to export crops, other types of fuel, and yet recently it's been a somewhat of a detriment and called out as a detriment that you're exporting wind. I don't get that, and I don't believe that. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. Over 25% of the generation in North Dakota right now comes from wind. So what about policy? We've had terrific policy in this state for almost 2 decades, started by pro-wind, pro-investment governors, namely John Hoeven, who spoke to you earlier today. And this was an opportunity and an attempt to diversify the energy economy in North Dakota, and it worked. It absolutely worked. Landowners are making millions of dollars of payments in the state. Local communities are receiving millions of dollars of property taxes in the state, and I'll get back to that in a moment. But it's worked. You know, I've said this before, many of you have actually heard me speak, it's been a while, that technologies and fuel costs in particular vary, as we know. We've seen oil go to 100 plus a barrel and encourage massive amounts of exploration in the Bakken. And we've seen it go below 50, and we all got scared that it was over. And those prices will continue to fluctuate up and down. Natural gas prices fluctuate. up and down, mostly down since 2008. They haven't really been fluctuating up. But when you have something that doesn't rely on fuel like wind, you don't have that variability. So while we have boom bust cycles in the other technologies and the other fuels, wind just keeps kind of plodding along, strongly going along. We know what we're going to generate for the day that we declare a project commercial. We know what the capital cost was. That capital cost translates into taxable revenue for the counties, and we just keep sailing along. I want to say something about the EmPower Commission because you may not realize how uniquely positioned North Dakota is with this commission. And I hope, one of my prayers is that the EmPower Commission continues to do the good work that it's done for now over a decade. I'm responsible for wind development in almost the entire United States. There's no state like North Dakota who has a commission, a government commission, a governor-run commission that vets its policy out way before it gets to the legislature. That has been such a blessing. Sometimes various factions in that EmPower Commission don't get along. We just kind of friendly rivals. But at the end of the day, it's very important that this commission continues to stick together and try to vet the big policy issues so that by the time it gets to the legislature every other year, there's some sort of meeting of the minds on that. I love the EmPower Commission. We've been on it. We've never had a vote. We're ex officio. We haven't ever been able to vote. It's still hugely beneficial for us, and I bet it's beneficial for all of the other energy companies that are on it. So we were plodding along, and I said that through the EmPower Commission, we were able to produce, I think, some good policy initiatives, some tax initiatives, which are a variation of that policy initiative. We're working together. It was not easy. It required a lot of give and take, but we were able to do it. And then the 2017 legislative session happened. And I think that in many ways that was a key inflection point for the industry. Driven in part, I suspect, by budget pressures and other things that are relevant to the businesses that we all represent, and I think in respect to some things that weren't so constructive. There were a bunch of motivations. It was not good. It was not pretty. I've heard the governor talk about this publicly, that we should do better. North Dakota needs to do better in 2019. I believe we're going to do better in 2019, but we can't go back to what happened in 2017. There were dozens of bills that were introduced to further regulate mainly wind, and it wasn't constructive. Earlier this year, outside of legislation, many of you read in the newspaper that the North Dakota Game and Fish Department issued what I call, quote, voluntary mitigation to impose somewhat arbitrary standards to offset our industry's indirect impacts on various things, including native prairie. You know, we're working through that constructively. And I would say this, Terry Steinwan, who's the director of that organization, is a terrific gentleman. And I believe that we're going to come up with really good solutions. Maybe they require some legislation. I don't necessarily believe that, but we're working constructively with them. The industry as a whole has gotten together. There's a task force to work on environmental issues that we see in other places, but not necessarily try to execute the way they've been presented in North Dakota. I think that it's all about responsible development, and North Dakota, I think, has benefited from NextEra being here, and NextEra has benefited terrifically from North Dakota being a pro-business environment. And we already mitigate. I don't want to really get into too much detail, but we mitigate, and we've done things like in our Wilton wind farm, which has been in the ground since 2010, where, you know, to mitigate our environmental impact there, we actually worked with Ducks Unlimited to create a very long term, a 50-year conservation easement on their Coteau Ranch in Sheridan County. So these things happen. They happen commercially. And when I say commercially, I mean where both sides win. Because what we had been seeing was when both sides lose. And that won't help. That won't help the case in North Dakota. And I'm actually happy to report that despite what we've seen in the press and other places, that we've been constructively working towards solutions with the Department of Game and Fish. There's some of my colleagues from other wind companies in the room today, and they would say the same thing. So I think it would be an understatement if I didn't say that we felt like we were under attack in 2017. And maybe that was intentional, maybe that wasn't intentional, but we were. I think our industry has a great advocate in Governor Burgum, and I think the state is going to really do well under his leadership in this next legislative session as he advises those of us who participate in policymaking. But you only have a session every 2 years, and it's been almost 2 years since the start of the last one. So what's been going on since? You know, since the close of the legislative session, policy discussions related to wind have continued. There have been a number of interim committees, most notably the Energy Development and Transmission Committee and the Natural Resources Committee meeting to understand some of the issues that I'm alluding to right now. I think, again, they've been fairly harmonious. I mean, there are opinions that are not necessarily aligned with each other, but they've been constructive discussions. There have been members from the independent system operators, both the MISO and the SPP, that have come to speak to members to actually, educate you on how power markets work. And that's really important because I think that there was this view that wind was going to be directly responsible for displacing homegrown coal. And when you look at how these power markets work, it's all a system. It's like a closed system. And the cheapest power is actually going to be the next bit of power on the system. And to America's benefit, that's been natural gas. Natural gas has benefited all of us. And if we can't compete with natural gas, then we're not going to continue to thrive. Natural gas exploration in the U.S. since 2008, when it peaked at probably an average of $8 an MMBTU, has been a tremendous blessing for the citizens of this country. Cheap energy, reliable energy, clean energy, okay? It's cheap, reliable, and clean. Natural gas checks all those boxes. Right now, it checks all those boxes. So we need to push to be as good as natural gas, but make no mistake about it. The independent system operators do not open up the wires so that they can let more wind in. They open up the wires so that they can let more, whatever the cheapest resource is. And we all have to compete. They set the marginal price. And transmission, those are the entities that actually operate the transmission that's owned by a number of transmission owners, including 4 or 5 utilities that operate in this state. Transmission benefits every generation resource, not just one. So there's been, again, a view that somehow wind is going to have preference on the transmission system. If a transmission line gets built and it happens to be because there was a lot of wind planned for an area, coal benefits, any natural gas that is generated in the state benefits, we all benefit. And we benefit by it reducing prices. Those things don't get built unless there's a stability problem, unless it's an economic decision. So the last thing I thought I'd talk about, and then I'll conclude, and maybe I'll have time for a question or two, is other things that are on the agenda coming up for the legislative session. You know, we've talked as a group about tax parity. There was a belief that wind wasn't carrying its fair share. There have been some studies that have gone on during the interim, and the conclusion was that we're taxed roughly the same as the other generation resources. But the difference is that all of our taxes are staying local. property taxes are staying in the local communities. So the conversation really has been about allocating that tax revenue, not about increasing that tax revenue. And we're certainly open to a portion of that going back to the state if that's what's required to continue the business. I personally worry that that gives much less incentive for local commissioners and people who regulate and issue permits on our wind farms. It gives them much less incentive to actually host a wind farm. But we'll see how that goes. We're working hard with the General Assembly to come up with language that makes sense for everyone. So really, that's it. To conclude, and I don't have time for questions, unfortunately. It's going to be another active session in 2019. We're going to participate. I always tell my team the same thing regardless of where we go. I live in Florida. I work a lot in North Dakota, but I live in Florida. My company is headquartered in Florida. We have a tremendous investment here, but we are always the visiting team. And we have to show proper deference for the people who are the home team. Y'all know your state better than we do. We're happy to participate here. We love the business environment in North Dakota. We want to see it continue. What I don't love is what I experienced in 2017. I trust that that's going to be better because I think the lines of communication are open. There's better information today than there was in January of 17. And I'm very hopeful, as I hope you are as well, that wind, as well as the other generation sources, have a tremendous future in this state. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, John. Now, the first of this afternoon's panel discussion will focus on the infrastructure needs and challenges in our state. Maintaining and providing adequate infrastructure is a challenge in a variety of areas that we rely on every day. The energy industry is, of course, no exception in regards to wind, natural gas, or coal-fired generation. Now, the moderator for our next session, focusing on these infrastructure needs, is Public Service Commissioner Julie Fedorchak. Julie.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Is Betsy out here too? Oh, here she is. Great. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you. What an honor it is for me to be here and participating in this way. I was part of the planning team for this great conference a number of years ago when I was working for John Hoven. So I worked with Emily and Carrie and the whole crew and know all the work that goes into making this a really effective day and a productive day. And so thank you to the planning team for all of the hard work that you did to make this happen. I'm excited for this afternoon's panel. We're going to have a little bit of fun. This morning was very informative, but I think we can all agree it started off on kind of a tense note. I mean, wow, that was, I'm ready to put some of the tension of the last few weeks behind and have a little bit of fun. So I think I have some willing participants here. I have a little bag of props that we'll get to in a minute. So we're going to, yeah, I know, that's a surprise. That's my surprise to you guys. They're pretty friendly, though, so you don't have to worry about it. So I started out this morning, and first, before I get going any further, I want to give a proper introduction to my colleague, Randy Chrisman. I know he's still here. Where are you, Randy? I thank you, Randy. He's a wonderful colleague on the commission, and this morning when Senator Hoven asked me if I brought my compadres, it was first thing Monday morning, and all I could think of was my kids. And I was like, no, I didn't bring my kids. So I said no. It took me a minute to realize who he was talking about. So sorry about that, Randy. Now you know why. I'm sure it doesn't surprise you now what I was thinking. So anyway, I started out this morning and asked my kids and my husband a question, and it was, if you are in an energy crisis, where would you like to be? And my grumpy 15-year-old said, North Dakota. And then a couple of the other ones said, well, probably California or a place like that where you don't need a lot of heat or air conditioning, a temperate climate, this, that, or the other. And I said, actually, Nate, the one who was grumpy about it, he was the right one. He had the right answer, because where would you want to be? You'd want to be in North Dakota, because we have an all of the above energy state, incredible energy resources. And so we can see those here exhibited on this slide, where and this comes from the Spotlight on Energy publication, which I love, and these fine people at BSC put that out too. So look around on this map. It might be a little bit hard to see, but you should take a copy of this. They're outside. And you can see the gray in the background is the Bakken Formation. The darker gray, which is slash gray, that is the actual oil fields. There's blue natural gas processing facilities. There's all the green is wind farms. The yellow, some of the little yellow sunshines on there are solar facilities. The black emblems are coal-based generation. The red is lignite mines. The purple are Synfuels plant. The yellow corns are ethanol facilities. There's orange little markers on there where they're recovered energy generation from waste heat from pipelines that actually helps generate electricity. There's some purple facilities on there in hydro. And then there's refineries also located on there, and then there's some red flames that are gas peaking facilities. So all told, I mean, that's an incredible bounty of energy resources. And then if you look at that, they've done some work to determine, so where do we stand nationally in terms of total energy production? And that is exhibited here. We are the 6th largest total energy producer in the nation. 3.65 trillion BTUs annually. And so that is just, we have amazing resources, and that's what we talk about when we say all of the above energy policy and energy direction and industries in our state. That's what we've got. And look at that, crude oil, natural gas, coal, renewables, and you don't even see some of the other things I listed on there. So our panel of pros have a lot of experience in the electricity sector, and we're going to be focusing our discussion today mostly on that. They're here to share what they believe are their biggest impacts facing their industry and their sectors as it relates to three baseload, to baseload power, but three current energy resources. So joining us from Minn Kota is Stacy Dahl. She's a senior manager of external affairs and communications for Minn Kota, and she's going to talk in a minute about the coal impacts on the coal side of things. We have Betsy Engelking discussing renewables. She is the vice president of strategy for Geronimo Energy, so she's going to be tackling both wind and some on solar. And then highlighting gas is Jean Schaefer. She is the senior legislative representative from Basin Electric Power Cooperative. All of these women have a lot of experience in each of these areas, so I've invited them to not just talk about their area, but also provide insights on the others and kind of cross-pollinate as they see the opportunity to do so. So next come the props. Each resource has different attributes that they bring to the grid, and I think it's important for us to recognize these attributes and note that there are strengths and weaknesses for all of them. But I like to see things in a positive light, and so so I have a little mascot for each of you that represents kind of what you're going to be talking about today. And so when I think about coal, I think about reliability. And how do you symbolize reliability? Well, when I think about something that's reliable, I think about friends. And so how do you symbolize friend? Well, let's see here. Oh no, he wrote Woody. And he's been so loved that he doesn't talk anymore. He used to say all kinds of funny things, and he's taped together. But so Stacy, you get to be Woody today and talk about coal, because you got a friend in Woody. And when we talk about renewables, what I think about is that they are infinite, that they never go away. The wind just blows and blows and blows and blows and blows, and the sun, God to help us if it ever stops shining. And so renewables are always with us and always available. And so I think of them as infinite. And so you get to be infinity today, Betsy. And then we come down to gas, and gas has a lot of attributes that are valued in the grid today, and one of them is, no, we're not going there. We're not going there, Jean. I got a lot of really bad 50th birthday gifts recently that we could have gone there, but we're not going to. We're going to think about gas and how important it is as a ramping resource because it's a fast start. And so you get to be a track spike. And also I note that gas has gotten over some hurdles of late too with its supply issues and cost issues. So that also helps you illustrate those things as well. So, okay, so I wanted to, before I get into their, each of their presentations, I wanted to just set the stage a little bit more about, with some of my perspectives. So I've been on the commission for 6 years, and when I started things, I would say we were in the infancy of this transformation into the renewable realm, and all the renewable sector was really starting to take off, but it was really just an infant. And today, I'd say we're maybe toddlers. It feels like we've come a long way, but I think in the whole scheme of where things are going to end up, I think we're just beginning to see the transformation that will occur in the electricity industry and the power industry in our country. And so when you look at North Dakota's, let's see, I want the next slide. Can you forward it for me? It's not, this thing isn't working. Well, basically, maybe she can move it for me. There we go, electricity production by fuel type. This is currently in North Dakota. So you see that we still have a lot of coal-fired generation. We got a pretty sizable slice of that pie is wind. We've got hydro, and natural gas is still pretty small. If you would have seen this pie chart 10 years ago, I think it would have looked a lot different. Tony could probably tell us exactly how it did look. But I'm guessing it was mostly coal and a little bit of hydro, if you would have gone back 10 years. And so we're seeing that evolution change, and we're seeing it change pretty quickly. And really, I think there's 3 drivers of the change. First of all, there's the policy drivers. We have the global warming issue. We've got the Clean Power Plan discussion that occurred, and now that's evolved into a new plan. Environmental regs, the SOX and the NOx issues that have impacted coal production and investment tax credits, so tax policy has had an impact. The renewable energy mandates throughout the country and goals in North Dakota, those have had an impact on this change as well. And then at the same time, though, there's been huge technological changes as well. The renewables have evolved incredibly. The prices have changed. The technology and the efficiency of wind and solar have improved dramatically. We've had fracking and the shale revolution that we know has really increased the supply of gas and stabilized the price of it. Electric vehicles, we've got energy storage, we've got distributed generation, we've got the grid, the smart grid, which is not now just one way but two way, and down the road we've got fusion. So there's just incredible amounts of technological changes that are also driving this at the same time as the policy changes. And then a third time overlaid of all of that is an aging fleet. So naturally, the fleet that exists out there in terms of the traditional, the coal generation facilities are reaching the end of their life, both appreciation-wise and then sometimes system-wise as well. And then the transmission grid is also needing to be refreshed. So all of these things have converged together to impact and drive these changes that we're seeing. And in the end, all of these things impact the market. And the market is what ultimately decides which electricity is produced and which electricity is purchased. And so all of those factors going in, I thought that leads then to let's talk a little bit about how the markets have changed. So this is both the energy and capacities. Hang with me for a minute. This is a little dry, but those are the graphs. There's going back to 2010, the energy and the capacity. So the capacity is nameplate capacity. That's the columns on the left. They're solid. And then the column to the right of that on each stack is the actual energy that was generated and sold. So one is just nameplate, how much you could do, and then the other is what was actually produced and sold. And so that shows you the black is coal, the blue is gas, yellow is nuclear, the gray is, what is the gray? I wrote this all down so I wouldn't forget. Oh yeah, the gray is probably hydro, and the orange, can somebody see that? Orange is other, and then the green is wind. And so this is in MISO. So you can see over the course of the last 8 or so years, nuclear, which is the yellow, has remained fairly steady. You've seen a significant increase in the gas. The blue nameplate capacity has gone on from 6% to 20 in 2010 to 24% in 2017. And the coal has gone from 73 to 48% in terms of its energy consumed. Actually, the gas nameplate was consumed was 6% to 24%. And renewables in MISO has just changed from 4% to 8% in terms of the actual energy consumed or purchased. So then we look at SPP. That's the other transmission organization that really serves North Dakota. And Basin is a member of the SPP. And this is the same chart for them. So again, it shows the energy, the capacity on the left and the energy generated on the right-hand bar. And you see some pretty sizable changes in this chart as well, especially in SPP. You can see the changes in the renewables or the wind in terms of how much of the share of that final stack is actually being delivered by wind generation. So the wind has grown from 4.5% to nearly 23% of the energy consumed in the SPP market from the time period of 2010 to 2017. And coal was at a high of 62% in 2011 and was 46% in 2017. So these markets, they tell a really powerful story, I think, about the transformation that's occurring in the electric industry. And the thing to note about markets is that they really don't wait for policy certainty. They don't wait for technology improvements. They reward participants every day, every minute of every day, for whatever energy they're bringing to the market and delivering for power on that day. And the price in the market really reflects all of the issues that I talked about earlier: the tax policy, the renewable mandates, the environmental regulations, availability of transmission. All of those issues are really reflected in the price of sale at the market. So with that as a backdrop, I want to turn it over to our first expert on the panel, which is Stacy Dahl. Stacy, I first met Stacy back when she was a legislator in the, what was it, that in the 90s? 2000s. The decades run together. I'm sorry, I've gotten really old all of a sudden. She always has impressed me with her kindness, but don't take that to be that she's soft or meek, because she is smart and she is very focused, and she does a lot of great work for Minn Kota. She's leading the team on their Project Tundra. And so she's going to talk a little bit about that today. And what's interesting about Stacy, she's also has this great job, and she's a mother of 2. And when I asked her something personal to share, she said her favorite time of the day is reading to her little boys at night. She's 2 little boys, reading books to them at night. And so we have lots of talks about raising boys in this crazy world. So Stacy, please share with us your insights.
Thank you very much, and my boys would be so thrilled of all of this panel to know that Woody is sitting right next to me. And we've already lost Woody. So thank you so much for the opportunity to represent or provide a point of view on coal in this diverse panel. We really appreciate it, both as a company and myself individually. And as the president calls it, beautiful, clean coal. And it's interesting, at a time when coal is challenged both in the market and from a policy perspective, Minn Kota continues to find ways to open our arms and try and find more opportunity for coal. And that's, I think, a little bit unique in this energy space. So if you could call up my presentation here. unless you want me to try give yours. Here we go. So just to give you a little bit of background about Minn Kota, we're a relatively small generation and transmission cooperative located headquartered in Grand Forks. So we have roughly the eastern third of North Dakota and northwest Minnesota that we serve, and all totaled about 150,000 customers. So not a huge customer base when you talk about costs and operating our system. And must be powered by wind. Just kidding. I'm just. To that point, we have plenty of wind resources within Minn Kota that we're very proud of. We have 450 megawatts, which places us as a renewable energy leader in the country. So we peak about 1,000 megawatts in the winter. So we do have a lot of wind energy, all based here in North Dakota. We also have a lot of coal-based energy and some hydro as well. You can see the resources depicted on the graph here, but we take a small share from the Coyote Station, and Unit 1 and Unit 2 are owned and operated by Minn Kota and its members. There we go. Julie paved the path on capacity versus energy. So again, just highlighting that we do have quite a few renewables on our system, but that in terms of actual energy delivered, coal remains the primary backbone and workhorse for our particular utility. When we talk about challenges to baseload coal, I like to think about it as a ball of yarn. And so within that decision for a utility, whether to run and operate or invest capital into a coal-based facility, it's really a confluence of policy and market opportunities that influence that decision. So there has been a lot said about the low natural gas prices. That is true. Natural gas continues to set the market. Additionally, after 2008, there was not a strong recovery in the electric market. So the growth that we have projected has not come to bear. And so that has been a challenge in terms of, we were once projecting 3% growth. We're right about 1% today. And that's not uncommon for other utilities in this region as well. And John referenced it in his presentation, but we have had a tough discussion in North Dakota about intermittent resources and their role in the market. Certainly that is one thread within this broader ball of yarn, but it's a factor. It is not accurate to say that is the entire picture. In terms of the federal policies that have helped to drive where we are, certainly tax credits for those renewable resources have played a role, but also carbon regulations. And you all are aware of where we have been within the realm of carbon regulations. We started with a preliminary rule that required us to reduce carbon emissions by 11%. And overnight, that standard went to 45%, which would have been devastating for the resource within North Dakota, but also more regionally because we are such a powerhouse exporter. We now have the Affordable Clean Energy Rule, which is much more workable, but there's still a lot to work through in that. And I think it's not lost upon the utilities that we could go from an untenable rule to a more manageable rule, and yet with an administration change, we could find ourselves in a difficult regulation all over again. The other point I would like to make in terms of the challenges to coal, it's not just carbon, it's other environmental regulations as well. And so there's something called new source review. And so if a coal plant becomes too efficient, meaning you can only make certain efficiency gains to your plant to better participate in the market, that has a market tieback. But if you make it too efficient, then the EPA can come back in and subject you to new standards for environmental regulations, which is which is very consequential to a utility. So within that are things like regional haze, which is a visibility issue, but there's been a long battle and a long history within North Dakota on that issue, and the disparity between what we have installed today for that program and what the EPA wanted us to install was hundreds of millions. So we never want to trigger new source review. That is very consequential. We were also asked to talk about what the state role is with respect to the coal industry. So I have to, and I talk about this almost everywhere I go, talk about the investment North Dakota has made and uniquely made in the research and development into the lignite industry. So I think about what we're facing with carbon. Rewind the clock 25 years or so, but we were having a big battle around mercury. And at that time, mercury was going to be the death knell of the industry in terms of the regulations. But the state of North Dakota, EERC, and the industry worked together and found a solution to mercury. I'm convinced we're going to do the same on carbon. We will get there. Again, going back to John's point about this policy discussion that we've had about wind and coal and what their roles are, my perspective is that the coal industry has to continue to find ways to sink load near these lignite plants. We are transmission constrained within North Dakota. Again, we're an exporter, so we take a discount on some of that energy we're sending out of state. And you can see it frequently if you pull up the MISO or SPP maps. So if we can find ways to sink facilities near our coal plants, then we improve our position not only within the market, but the resource as well. And opportunities to more efficiently move energy to other markets, we should be looking at ways we can get our energy into, for example, more eastern markets where pricing is better. And where do we have opportunities to do that? I know John Wida is at the Lignite Council is having some preliminary discussions through his role in the Transmission Authority. And it's an opportunity to continue the discussion to find a path forward for lignite, particularly. I mentioned Minn Kota's embracing of coal. We think it's going to be part of our future for a long time. And we wouldn't be reviewing and exploring the feasibility of Project Tundra if we didn't think it had a significant role in our future. So for all the discussion we've heard about cheap natural gas pricing, these units are still very cost effective for us and into the decades ahead of us, even with that low natural gas pricing, because to build a new asset is still more expensive than to operate our existing assets. For those who are not familiar with the project, I just put an outline up there. I'm not going to get into the details, but it is a proposed capturing of carbon from an existing coal plant using an amine-based process. The CO2 is separated, compressed, and then can go one of two places: deep into the geology, directly underneath the Young Station, or because there's a tax credit that can help us monetize that investment. What is more likely to happen is some or all of that will be used for enhanced oil recovery in the conventional fields of North Dakota. So our partners are BNI Energy and Eagle Operating, which is a North Dakota-based oil company. So within this project path, we are roughly $30 million into this project through state, federal, and industry dollars to explore all of the component pieces. We are making our next step for the front-end engineering design phase forthcoming. So we continue to track very well with the dynamics of that project. Industry outlook. So this chart probably looks familiar. The coal line is in red, and you can see a steep drop off between 2000 and 2020. So we're through the majority of the coal retirements. A lot of that was driven by increased environmental regulations and environmental controls, and a lot of those plants just decided to retire instead. So we're through the lion's share of that. And you can see after 2020, the industry is projected to stabilize in terms of the units that will operate from here to 2050. And that, I think, is consistent with our worldview as well. In terms of our Minn Kota resources, and again, why we have optimism on our particular units, when you look, so MPC coal is those 3 lignite shafts that we discussed. They're available between the 3 units about 94% of the time. Of that 94% of the time, they're dispatched into the market 91% of the time, which is interesting. So we're very competitive within the marketplace. And a similar chart, I think the MPC wind is available about 50, right around 50% of the time, and is rarely not dispatched into the market. So given that context, pricing within the markets in terms of forward curves are projected to be fairly stable. So given our investments, given our projected investments and projected cost curves, we think we're positioned to be very competitive going forward. So again, the outstanding question to us is what's going to happen on carbon regulations. So we're not sitting back and waiting for the next version of a carbon regulation. We are undertaking the Project Tundra path to review the feasibility. The decision has not been made to build the project. But at the end of this, we will have made a very educated decision about whether this type of project, whether we can make that business case. And certainly there is some optimism around that dynamic. And so you heard a little bit more about the value of baseload and dispatchable assets into the marketplace. So as we have that national conversation, that is going to continue to be very significant to our industry as well. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Stacy. We'll come back to you with questions at the end. Do you have your own mic? Okay, our next speaker will be Betsy Engelking. She, as I said earlier, is Vice President at Geronimo Energy, where she has been working since 2012. She currently leads the company's policy efforts. She has been instrumental in the company's work on solar, and so she's going to provide some insights on that today, in addition to talking about wind. And she's going to be careful to stay away from any solar projects that are currently being considered by the commission, however. So Betsy was Director of Resource Planning for Xcel Energy for a number of years, where she developed and implemented long-range power supply plans. And she also held positions with Great River Energy and Minnesota Public Utilities Commission, so she has a lot of experience in this whole arena. Since the beginning of her career, Betsy has worked both regionally and nationally to promote the advancement of wind energy and other renewables. On an interesting personal side note, in her free time, Betsy loves to sing. So she sings in a number of different choruses and choir groups in her community, and as a fun twist to our panel today, she has agreed to sing her presentation.
I don't think so. I want to talk, I'm supposed to talk about renewables, but since I spent a lot of years planning for electric companies, I want to talk about the all of the above strategy. And I think that, as sometimes a little bit of a cynic, I think that when people started talking about the all of the above strategies, it was an anti-renewable kind of concept. And I think that that has evolved over time, that, when states talk about an all of above strategy, they really are starting to mean all of the above. And I think that that's important, because, and I'm going to put up a couple maps, but, if you think about Julie's map where she showed all of the different energy production opportunities in North Dakota, I mean, you have everything. You've got coal and oil and gas, hydro and wind, and hopefully some solar soon. And it's such a great opportunity to diversify a portfolio because, you know, we all know that diverse portfolios behave better than, you know, single or, you know, single stocks or, you know, a couple different stocks. And really, when you think about a diverse supply portfolio, you are guarding against cost issues. So if one resource becomes, you know, one fuel becomes very expensive at some point, you can swap out into some of your other fuels that are less expensive. It addresses supply disruption. If for some reason you can't get natural gas to your plants, you can't get coal to your plants, there are other options out there. And really, when you talk to people a lot, you know, what do they really want out of their electric system? And usually it's sort of this triangle of safe, clean, and reliable, clean, and low cost. And, you know, being able to blend all of these resources together, I think, is a great opportunity for any state, and to have them all right in your borders is an extremely good opportunity for North Dakota. So I'm going to talk, I have to point this way. Ah, there we go. So North Dakota is one of the windiest states in the country. And I think some people have talked about how it's, yeah, how it can be called the Saudi Arabia of wind, et cetera. And it is absolutely unbelievable from a resource perspective, the amount of wind that you can get out of turbines in North Dakota. I mean, some of our most profitable projects have been in North Dakota simply because it costs the same to put up a wind turbine just about anywhere. And the way that you really make money is to get more energy out of it than anywhere else. So now we're starting to talk about maybe moving some towers up a little taller, a little bit wider rotor swept diameter, a little bit higher in the megawatts, and moving that up is going to make the wind in North Dakota even better as you start looking at wind at 100 meters instead of 80 meters and some things like that, you know, once we get all the environmental issues worked out. So it's a really exciting place for wind development. And, you know, if you look at the wind industry in North Dakota right now, North Dakota is about, they're about the third in wind resource, third to sixth, depending on how you look at it. Whether if you're counting the land mass, then Texas comes out ahead in terms of wind resource. But it's the 11th in installed capacity in the U.S. And has a really high potential for addition. So this map says 2996 is what you have installed. There's some more under construction. I think I added up something in a recent article that says it was about 3,082. So, you know, we can quibble a bit over numbers, but it says it has the potential capacity of 296,000 megawatts, which is a huge amount of wind, and certainly we're not going to see that much wind go in the state, but you can see that that provides a diversity of areas where wind could be developed and a ability to pick the best spots in North Dakota, because you know, wherever we put it, it's going to be windy pretty much. North Dakota is an energy exporter, and you know, not only do they export lignite, particularly to Minnesota, but they also can export wind and solar, and some of the wind and solar that's being developed here is being exported, and more of it, I think, can be exported in the future. There's a lot of talk about offshore wind, and offshore wind is really hot in, say, the East Coast, where they don't have a lot of land mass to put up wind. It's the same in Europe. They don't have a lot of land to put wind on, but they like the idea of having their wind local, and so they put up offshore. Offshore wind costs about 3 times what it costs to put wind turbines in North Dakota. And if you can resolve delivery problems, everybody in the country would be better off. We put the investment here in the Midwest where we've got a lot of wind, and we move it to the states that need it. So it's a really exciting opportunity once we start looking at delivery issues. I'm going to talk a little bit about solar. Solar is a little different in North Dakota. I don't know what I thought.
There's a lot to juggle up on this stage,
Yeah.
and we don't have a desk.
Here we go. So this is a map of the solar resource of the U.S. And it looks pretty much like you would probably expect, right? You go down into the southwest corner where there's deserts, et cetera. It's got the best solar resource. Looks a little greener as you get toward the middle eastern United States, and up in the corner where we have Oregon and Washington, it's pretty blue because it rains there all the time, frankly. But compare it in the lower right-hand corner on this map, there is a map of Germany and their solar resource on the same scale. And Germany right now has installed 41 gigawatts of solar on their system, and it's generating essentially about 2.5 gigawatt hours of energy per year. And look at what their resource looks like in terms of, based on what the US looks like. So I zoomed in this map, so that's why it's blurry, but I zoomed it in to North Dakota, and you can see that North Dakota actually has, sorry about my juggling here, I'm going the wrong way. You can see that North Dakota actually has a pretty good solar resource, especially when you compare it to Minnesota. And Minnesota right now has about 800 megawatts of solar installed. If you look down in the southwest corner here, you've got a pretty good solar resource. And one of the things about solar is that it is much more valuable than wind because it shines on the on-peak hours when energy is more expensive and more of it is being used. And so, one of the things that we find is that wind and solar can make a really good complement to each other. If you see a lot of the wind at night and in your shoulder months, and you see a lot of the solar in your peak months, you start putting these resources together and they become a reliable part of the grid as you put things together. And I would never say that we are going to see a system that doesn't have some dispatchable energy on it. Frankly, I don't think it's possible, even though California legislators think it's possible. But I think that it's important to see that these resources can be a significant part of the mix. And they're cost effective. I didn't put a cost slide up here. Well, I have one on lowering costs. But right now, if you look at the Lazard study that gets published every year on the levelized cost of energy, wind and solar are among the lowest cost resources that are available. They're on parity with natural gas. And so one of the things you can start thinking about is wind and solar as a substitute fuel for natural gas production. So you take the wind and the solar when it's cheaper than your natural gas, and it is a lot of the time, and then when the wind and solar aren't available, you turn on your natural gas. And it's one way to create, what we would call like a clean baseload kind of plant, where you have something dispatchable paired with a couple of variable resources, and you can get around the clock energy. And I think it's important for people to start thinking about this, that a baseload power doesn't necessarily mean one plant that's operating around the clock. In fact, a baseload plant is really more of an economic concept than it is a reliability concept. It basically means that coal is a really, really, really cheap fuel, but it's very expensive to build the infrastructure in order to convert it to electricity. And so what do you want to do when you have a high capital cost and a really cheap fuel is you want to generate as much of that as you possibly can to spread the capital cost over more units. And so, it's really started as an economic construct. Certainly, it helps the reliability of the grid system, but the grid system has learned how to operate with very, very diverse resource mixes, and particularly with flexible resources like natural gas that are a little easier to ramp up and ramp down. And that really is what's leading us to the grid of the future. Now, when you look at North Dakota installed solar, it's not a really great story. These bars look nice and high, but if you look at the scale, it basically goes up to 140 kilowatts. So the entire amount of solar installed in North Dakota right now, from the most recent data that I could find, is about 500 kilowatts. And in fact, I did find a site that said North Dakota is the 51st in development of solar, which I was trying to figure out what are they including. Maybe it's DC, but here we go. There's a lot of opportunity in North Dakota because you don't have as much solar as Washington, DC does. So what's the outlook right now for wind and solar? There's a lot of things happening. There's a lot of opportunities and a lot of challenges. There we go. So, I mean, first of all, we heard about it a little bit this morning, the phase down of the tax credits. So the wind PTC, if you started constructing by the end of 16, it was still the full PTC. This year, it's from 2.3 cents, it's down to 1.38 cents, which is 60% of the full. Next year, it's going to be 40% of the full, 0.92, and in 2020, it's going to be gone. So in order to get any part of the PTC at all, projects have to start being constructed by the end of next year. And after that, you get about 4 years to complete those projects and to still take advantage of that PTC. Now, solar got a little bit of a longer extension because it was a little bit less of a mature technology. And so the 30% ITC will go through 2019. After that, it'll be reduced to 26%. 2021, it'll be 22%. And then in 2022, it will be 10%, which is the same ITC that all capital projects get in the US. If you're a residential user, you want to put solar on your house, do it next year, because the 30% ITC will be available, be the best discount you'll ever get. And in 2022, it goes to zero because there is no investment tax credit for residential customers, homeowners and things like that. But at the same time that we're seeing these phase down, we're also seeing technology improvements. Like I said, taller towers, larger capacity turbines, increased efficiency of solar cells, all of these things that are driving costs down. And, it's interesting because we heard a lot this morning about, well, we have to get rid of the subsidies and, we have to treat everybody on a level playing field. But I will tell you, nobody is more happy to see the PTC go away than me, unless there are some other wind developers out there who see it the same way. The PTC is really expensive for us to monetize. We can't monetize it ourselves because it can only be monetized against passive income. So we have to go to big banks and big brokerages. And they, of course, don't buy the PTC from us at full cost. They want a discount. They want to get these tax credits at a discount. Otherwise, why would they buy them? It's very, very expensive. First of all, the returns can be somewhere around 8 or 9% to these banks on a credit that is, almost virtually guaranteed. And the legal fees exceed $3 million to $5 million every time you do a tax equity financing. So we're not really getting all of the benefit, and the customers aren't really getting all the benefit of the PTC. And when the PTC goes away, it's going to be much easier to finance projects, to finance more things locally, to be more flexible. And the other thing that's going to happen when it goes away is that the markets will stabilize because there will no longer be an interest in bidding wind at less than zero. I mean, right now, every time you produce a kilowatt hour of wind, you get 2.3 cents for the first 10 years of operation, which means that if you want to bid it into the market, you're willing to bid as low as about $32.50 a megawatt hour negative, because you're still going to get the PTC and avoid the tax effects of that. And so right now we are seeing a lot of negative pricing, because when there's a lot of wind, particularly off peak, everybody's bidding negative to make sure that their wind runs and they get those production tax credits. So once that's gone, we will have more stable markets as well. Move forward. You know, we're seeing increasing demand for wind and solar as replacement for retiring plants. And, you know, I don't think all the coal plants are retiring because of, you know, necessarily environmental concerns. Some of them are retiring just because they're really, really old. And, you know, we put lives on these plants, and some of them are running way beyond what we estimated original lives were. And it's just more expensive to upgrade them than it is to go build something new. And that's why you're seeing more gas and renewables being built. Another thing that we're seeing, and particularly as you see solar start to grow, are some land use issues. Solar is a little different from wind. On wind, you can still farm about 95% of the area within a wind farm. And with solar, it really does take up 100% of the land mass. I mean, we talk a lot about, well, can you have sheep graze under them? Can you do something like that? And the answer is kind of no. You know, one of the things they found out is that sheep and goats like to chew on the wires. So it's not really a great solution. But one of the things that a lot of people are doing now, and it's coming into like a lot of laws, are planting pollinator-friendly plants underneath solar farms. And this is really important because I think a lot of you have probably heard about the problems with the bee population, and that a lot of the nicotinoid pesticides are wiping them out. And so having these pollinator-friendly plants to attract bees to areas where you need to fertilize, you need to pollinate your crops and things like that, can be a real benefit for the area. Also gives an opportunity to rest the soil. And solar is a very temporary installation, and you probably laugh when I say temporary is 30 years, but you don't even put concrete in the ground. You don't pour footings or anything like that. You just drive the poles into the ground, and when it's time to take it away, you just pick the poles up and you walk everything away, and that allows you to go back and utilize the area as an agricultural use again when the project is done. So just look a little bit at falling costs here. You can see we've had a precipitous decrease in costs. This scale is 2009 to 2017. And through that time, solar has fallen 72% in the cost of dollars per megawatt hour. Wind has fallen 67%. And storage, which I'm going to talk a little bit about next, has fallen 79%. Now, this is on two different scales. So the wind and the solar have all fallen down to just below $50 a megawatt hour. Storage is still at $200 a megawatt hour, which makes it not quite yet ready for prime time in terms of economic uses on the system. But there are some specialty uses on the system that make economic sense right now. It'll further our understanding of storage on the grid. I want to point out that these are unsubsidized costs. These are costs without the PTC. And I will tell you, with the PTC, we have been seeing costs in wind in North and South Dakota being bid as low as about $17 a megawatt hour. So you can see what that looks like, and you can see why a lot of utilities are buying wind and solar right now. So storage is really kind of the new frontier, I think, and it's one of the things that's going to enhance the ability to add more renewables to the system and to make them reliable. You can see that there's a lot of solar that's going in right now, but it's still not at a price or a scale that's going to make a big difference in the grid. And we're going to see that coming. First of all, storage has a lot of different functions. And I worry a little bit about storage. A lot of times when particularly when I talk to policymakers about storage, they think about it like gas storage, like there's a big cavern in the ground and we're putting the kilowatt hours in there. We're going to take them out and use them when they're ready. And storage doesn't really work that way. It practically would be difficult to build big enough storage to put all your wind generation in off peak and to bring it back on peak when it's needed. Instead, storage does things like balance the grid. It makes sure it provides VAR support, which is something you don't get from wind and solar facilities. It allows people to shave their peaks. A lot of you pay your electric bills based on your peak load, and solar is a great way to shave those peaks and to reduce that overall cost. It does some storing and smoothing of renewable generation. If you think about batteries, you buy them in two different ways. You buy them as capacity, so your maximum capacity, say, is 2 megawatts, and then duration. And say your duration is 4 megawatts, which basically means you can run your 4 megawatt hours, which means you can run your 2 megawatts for 2 hours. And so that's the kind of scale that we're seeing right now in storage. It can be used as backup power behind the meters, and we're seeing some of that happen. Big installation at the Chicago Aquarium right now that is also selling some services to the grid. Can defer large infrastructure investments instead of having to build, increase a substation or something like that. You can put some storage in there. So it's growing, but it's not yet at the point where it's going to, seriously impact the grid. But it's coming. And so really, a lot of what everybody's talking about right now is building the power grid of the future. And the power grid of the future really is an all of the above idea. It is transmission interconnected resources. It is distributed generation, distributed connected resources. It is local generation on rooftops. It is storage, and it is also a very managed system. Right now we kind of treat our generation as a passive system, and it will have to be managed and coordinated. And again, this goes back to this morning's discussion about why cybersecurity is going to be so important as we start putting this in. And as I said at the beginning, a diverse grid is still the best option for your reliable, clean, and low-cost energy. And so I like that we're talking about all of the above this year, because I think that it's something that North Dakota can really embrace, not putting these resources against each other, but allowing them to all work together to provide your reliability and your cost reduction.
Thank you, Betsy. We'll be back with some questions hopefully in a little bit. But next we're going to hear from Jean. Jean Schaefer from Basin Electric. She is the Senior Legislative Representative for Basin Electric Power Cooperative, where she's worked since 2013. She primarily works on legislative issues in North Dakota and Iowa, and on federal regulatory issues as well. Prior to being at Basin, she worked as the Executive Director for North Dakota Water Coalition. And with all that time that Jean spends on energy policy and working with policymakers, she chooses to spend her free time with furry creatures, friendly furry creatures, dogs. She is a volunteer at the Rock and Rescue, Dog Rescue, and has a couple of rescue dogs herself. So Jean, tell us about your insights on gas and its future.
Great. Thank you, Julie. I'll just have you know that my husband left on a work trip last night, and so I presented this to my trio of rescue dogs, and the puppy, who stops for no one or no thing, promptly went into the laundry room, into his kennel, and took a nap. So I don't know how well that bodes for you all, but we'll just hang tight and go forward. So thank you for having me here today. And talking about some of our natural gas generation, real quickly, quick overview of Basin. We've got about $8 billion in assets. We are like Stacy's Minn Kota Cooperative. We are also a member-owned, member-driven cooperative. We serve in a 9-state region, and that accounts of about 141 electric cooperative members, and that is about 3 million consumers at the end of the line that we provide service to through that. Generating resources, I'll talk The upper two red dots in the northwest corner of North Dakota will be what I'm talking about today. Those correlate very well with the map from our EmPower colleagues, as well as everything else that we have on the basin system within that footprint. And this is our generation portfolio. You'll see from 2000 to today, that has changed dramatically. And I think if we stretch that out, it would actually correlate very well with the SPP bar graph as well. And so up close, as of 2018, the coal would be about 44%, and then you're seeing the wind at about 20-some%, and then almost on equal par with that is the natural gas generation that we have as well. So what got us to that picture today is back in about 2012, we were looking at what we were needing in the Williston Basin. The Bakken load was picking up, and this was our load forecast, which was rather scary for us. So we were finding ourselves about 500 megawatts short. And so we took a look at where it needed to be built, what could be built, and what could meet that need. And in response to that, we built two peaking plants. So the first one, Lonesome Creek, Watford City area, about 225 megawatts, meant to be a peaking station, 5 units, 45 megawatts each. And then up in the Williston area, we have Pioneer Gen, and that's also peaking natural gas, about 250 megawatts as well, 3 units. Both of those, Lonesome came on in 2013, and Unit 1 in 2013, Unit 2 in 14, and then we put Phase 3 in of some 12 reciprocating engines as well. So this has been the response that we had to build. And so why did we do this? We had a need for some quick resources, and understand natural gas prices were not low yet. This is back when they were not low yet. So you need to put that, go back in time. But we need 500 megawatts of power very quickly. We were responding to the fast growth in the Bakken. Gas peaking is fast to permit. Julie would get this, faster to permit and to construct than it is on any coal-based power plant or anything else. It did provide quick offset to the wind generation that we have PPAs for, and it was designed to be peaking only. So these are the forces that we were dealing with. Again, it was intended to be peaking only. However, in 2015, we did join an RTO. We are with the SPP Southwest Power Pool. And so how has that changed our current use of natural gas generation? So now natural gas prices are much lower. So really we are looking at these peaking units being used very similar to base load. So they're running a lot. And so this does have some complexities that come into the picture on the O&M side. We have some unanticipated costs that go into this, that these are running far more than we anticipated them to run. Our coal assets really are fairly competitive because of our mine mouth locations and because of the partnerships that we have. North American Coal has been a great partner to, even down to how they mine, in helping us keep our coal-based generation up and running. I consider we've got in North Dakota, AVS is a very young, I would call it a very young power plant in the mid-'80s because I graduated then. So of course it's young. So we like to keep those coal assets around, and you do, put those environmental controls and all of those assets on. That costs in the millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions to do. And so we can keep these running for a long period of time. As far as us looking at our generation going forward and what we'd forecast into, we really don't see anything until the 2028, 2030 timeframe as far as building any new generation. If we do have needed generation, we would really just go to the RTO and buy our capacity from SPP. State and federal policy, some of the things we were asked to talk about today. So Stacy and I were talking on the phone, and I actually had this blank under the state level, and so we got to talking and something, and I thought, well, with the gas, would we want to talk about flaring? But yeah, I didn't want to get into that. And so what we did talk about, though, was that, policies like the State Industrial Commission and doing those partnerships with the ERC on the research for the natural gas storage, does that help offset some of those supply disruptions? We did have an issue where New Year's Eve, when we had a balmy -30 going on last year, we had some freeze-offs going on, as well as we tripped a compressor down at the Glen Allen pumping station in our pipeline, the Northern Border pipeline. So supply can be a problem with gas. Coal has, a pile of coal sitting there. You're usually good, but it takes 24 hours to 3 days to come up. Gas turns on and it's going in 10 minutes. And at that time, when we had this situation, the wind wasn't blowing. So at that time it was needed, so base load really did need to come up and save the day. So having some storage options for natural gas, those types of policies and those R&D types of policies, and I'd say that for gas and coal, supporting in the state realm all of the research and development that helps keep us in the forefront of energy development, I think are very good things. Federal level policy, really the grid resiliency efforts, the market design enhancements, those types of things going forward. Julie and I were having a conversation about this when we were talking last week. Is it really is FERC going to be able to respond to this, or is it really an RTO, your regional transmission organization discussion of how each RTO is going to deal with this? If you've researched and looked at one RTO, you have researched and looked at one RTO. They are all very diverse and very different, and they are very regional based. And so some of the things that SPP is doing, taking a look at some of the market design enhancements, they are doing that as an RTO, and we are all about being, Basin Electric is definitely wanting that, make sure all resources are adequately compensated for the attributes that they bring forward, and ramp rate for natural gas is a very significant attribute. So with that, I was quick. Look how quick I was. I don't even know how that dog had time to fall asleep. But with that, I would stand for any questions, Julie.
Excellent,
Thank you.
Excellent. And shall I ask questions, or have some been submitted?
I do have one that we can take, is can the waste heat from flaring be used for cogeneration of electricity at individual oil wells?
Talk about that, Jean.
Probably. that borderlines on what we would call self-generation, and we do have some entities that want to take a look into that, but it comes with all the complexities that comes into an entity wanting to take on all of the responsibilities and aspects of being a utility, and sometimes it's not fun. So I would just offer that as an answer.
Just from my perspective, I've heard about these various technologies, and different entrepreneurs have come into the office or talked to me at different events, and there's all kinds of people working on that type of technology to generate, and there's many that already exist. And when it comes to, a lot of them seem to be using the waste heat to generate power on site just for the use on the well pad, to maybe fill the gap before the electricity lines get there, because that build out takes some time. Or also, the other complicating factor is that the grid in North Dakota is not a two-way grid today. It is one way. And in order for somebody to self-generate and sell onto the grid, well, I think there are some co-ops that, Cass Electric, I think, does do some two-way out east, but generally speaking, this is not widely used in North Dakota, so we have to make enhancements to the grid. It's a pretty big step that we haven't really embarked on. There's a lot of states doing it in East, and Ohio is really active in that area of the smart grid. We'll definitely get there. It's just not something that a lot of the utilities have pursued in North Dakota yet.
As well as unraveling some existing long-term contracts that utilities have as well, that those things need to be worked their way through as well.
Yep. Okay, that's it. All right, well, I have a couple questions, and if you have questions, you can text them in to Retha, but how much time do we have? Do we have about 10, 15? 5 minutes, okay. My first question comes from things that you all three said, but first of all, Stacy, you mentioned you're kind of waiting for the next round of carbon regulations, and keeping in mind that obviously your preferred would be no more carbon regulations, but barring that being the future, do you have a preference? Does your company have a preference for what you would like to see any future carbon dioxide regulations being?
Thank you. And just to be clear, actually we do support a carbon regulation in place because not to get too far into the legal environment, but this is being promulgated as part of the Clean Air Act. And so if you have a regulation under the Clean Air Act, it can protect you from civil suits. And we've seen an attempt at civil suits trying to hold various petroleum companies liable for climate change, et cetera. So there is some legal protection to us to have a regulation in place. And that's a huge piece of certainty that we need. And so when we think about a rule that's manageable, I would say it's pretty close to the one that was just rolled out last week or the week before. And so there is plenty of flexibility. We still need to work through some components and get some more certainty around that. But as a general rule, going all the way back to Massachusetts versus EPA, we expected a rule, and this is a flexible rule. But again, back to my earlier statement, with an administration change that could be repromulgated and we could face an entirely new regulation. So again, I think Heidi made the point very well this morning that this really needs to be addressed by Congress so we don't have this 11% to 45% to some flexible rule to potentially a damaging rule again.
Excellent, thank you. And thank you for achieving the one important goal of all panels, and that's to use the word promulgated. We did it, thank you. All right, Betsy, a question for you. You talked about looking forward to the day that the production tax credits and investment tax credits are no longer in use. And can you speak to what impact you envision that having on price?
You know, I think that, as I was saying, because those are so expensive for us to actually monetize, the impact on price is going to be a lot less than people think. I think a lot of people take today's price and then they add the 2.3 cents and then they gross it up for tax effects and they say, oh, it's, you know, wind is going to be $60 now. But, you know, it isn't. It's going to be maybe a half of that increase in terms of, you know, the new opportunities that come for more efficient financing once you see the tax end. And I think what will happen is that the year after it ends, it's going to take the industry a little while to kind of shake itself out and see you know, where the price is going to land. And after that, I think you're going to see customers start buying again. I think there is going to be a lag, but once we, you know, figure out what the price is and how it compares to other things, I think we're going to see a lot more being purchased.
And the impact on price will be many years down the road, however, right? Because the 10 years and they're baked into power purchase agreements. And so talk a little bit about, I mean, how long in the future would we see the price being impacted once
the impact on the price of new projects is going to be immediate because they won't have that benefit of the production tax credit in the first 10 years. I think a lot of PPAs that we have right now, they actually normalize that effect of the tax credit over the life of the contract. So you don't see real big price fluctuations. So you don't, for example, if a utility were recovering it, it would show a high price for the first, or a low price for the first 10 years, and then it would jump up and, you know, and then it would start depreciating again because you wouldn't have the tax credit. But most of the PPAs have actually taken it and spread it over the life of the contract. So current projects, you probably won't see a big price adjustment. New projects after the PTC is expired is where you're going to see those price increases.
And then one more follow-up on that, just because I've seen some talk about this at the PSC. How can the existing credits be used for repowering? Is it possible to get in under the existing credits and repower and get them for another 10, 15 years?
Yeah, so the rule that has been released on repowering right now is that if you are making an investment that is at least 85% of the value of the plant, you can take the production tax credits and use them for repowering. And that's what's causing a lot of firms to repower early. There's several wind farms in Minnesota that were built in the mid-90s, beginning of 2000, that are looking at repowering and utilizing those tax credits. So it is an opportunity, but it only lasts until the tax credit lasts. So once it's gone, you couldn't use it for repowering any longer.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of our time. Thank you, ladies, for indulging me on some of the lighter sides of the panel this afternoon and for sharing all of your wonderful insights. And yes, I will collect my little props again to return them home. I think we actually talked Woody's ear off. Literally. Thank you very much.
I would like to go ahead and acknowledge our silver sponsors for today's event. Those are, and there's a lot of them, so don't get up and run away before I say them all, okay? We have the Lignite Energy Council, Wilkinson, Barker & Nauer, Enbridge, the North Dakota Petroleum Council, Apex Clean Energy, One Oak, Otter Tail Power, the Bank of North Dakota, MDU Resources Group, and EDF Renewable Energy. So thank you for those sponsors for those reports. And as you can guess, it is no secret to anyone in this room that change within the energy industry is constant. From new opportunities to new challenges, it may seem like nothing these days is business as usual. So our final panel of the day explores several of these challenges and emerging topics within the industry. Here to guide us through this discussion is the Interim Commissioner of the North Dakota Department of Commerce, Sean Kessel. Sean.
Thank you very much, Retha. I appreciate that introduction, and thank you all for staying as late as you are. We're almost to the end. We'll have a great speaker on these panels, and then our next speaker is pretty darn wonderful as well. So we have a disparate group of topics that we're going to talk to you today about, and I'm going to just spend a little bit of time talking about the Department of Commerce. As you all probably know, the portfolio for the EmPower Commission falls within Commerce's bailiwick. And we have had some changes that have happened at Commerce. Noticeably, my title has changed very recently. And so I just wanted to make sure that everybody is assured that the Department of Commerce is become nimble, and we have some 4 divisions that are legislatively mandated that are part of our organizational structure. Those 4 divisions are the Division of Community Services, and Bonnie Malo, who's in the audience. Please, Bonnie, stand up. She runs the Division of Community Services for the Department of Commerce. She has a great deal of experience that we rely upon to provide us with some historical perspective when we have our senior team meetings. She just loves it when I point that out, by the way. But in terms of Division of Community Services, they're responsible for CDBG funding. They're responsible for weatherization. And those dollars come from the Department of Energy, by the way. And they also do the state energy program. So Bonnie has been in her position for some time, and we appreciate what she does for every day for the Department of Commerce. The next is Economic Development and Finance, and John Schneider. He's also in the audience somewhere. John, if you could stand up. John, if you could stand up, we'd appreciate that. Sorry, John, I apologize. He'll get me later, don't trust me. So John is also one of the veterans that we really count on for some historic knowledge within Commerce, and he is responsible for the SBDC program, PTAC, which is a procurement program for the federal government, APUC, Ag Utilization Commission, Impact Dakota, some FDI implementation, which is foreign direct investment, and then also rare earth. So he's got a big plate that he's working hard and diligent every day to diversify North Dakota's economy. The next is workforce development, and right now we're in a state of transition when it comes to workforce development. As you may know, Michelle Comer, who has our labor commissioner and also in charge of job service, is leading the strategy with regards to the state workforce development strategies. We are working closely with her, and we'll have our staff, which includes a few people that ran the conference. If you happen to attend that just last month, the workforce conference, that is something that the Department of Commerce puts on and participates in. This is obviously a huge impact on all of us in the room moving forward in trying to not only attract great companies, but retain great people here in our wonderful state. The next legislatively mandated division is tourism, and Sarah Adi-Coleman runs that division for us. I don't believe she's here with us today, but she's been doing a great job with that. She's actually the reigning state tourism director in the United States. So great applause to Sarah. She does a great job in marketing and providing for tourism development in the state of North Dakota. And then we have two offices that were recently created. And the first one I want to talk about is strategy. James Lamont, who is in the room. James, would you mind standing up? Thank you, James. This is a recently created strategy for us. And James predates me by about a month, I think, with the Department of Commerce. I know he's really good at what he does because he also has a similar background as me. I was a city administrator, and as was James. But he also worked at DC for a while, has a wonderful military background, and is in charge of census, market research, trade office, research North Dakota, and IP commercialization. So he's a busy guy, and also it leads our UAS strategies as well. So they just came back, both John and James, from Las Vegas, and while they were there, a senior Trump official was just touting the UAS objectives that North Dakota has. I don't know, for those of you who may remember or saw the news story, we had an unmanned aerial flight over the Bison tailgating game, and that was the first time that they had a drone fly over people. And I know that may not seem like a big deal, but from a national perspective, that was a huge thing, and we're getting credit for being the first in the nation to do that. So, and then our next is Main Street Initiative. As you all know, I'm sure the governor will touch upon his Main Street Initiative as he speaks to us here in about an hour or so, and innovation. And Holly Holt is the office director for that division. So we have community engagement people working with the MSI program, the Innovate program, and then she also is the interim coordinator for the workforce strategies. So that is our Department of Commerce. We're excited to be able to host today, and I encourage you to have a conversation with those people that are in the room that I mentioned from Commerce. We're excited about our future and where we're going, and helping North Dakota become more diversified and a better place to live. So with that, we'll move on to our first presenter. Our first presenter is Gary Zuroff. He's from the city of Dickinson, North Dakota. He's the Public Works Director there. Senator Hoeven, when he was sitting up here, mentioned that he sits on a committee that deals with energy and water, and that's a great segue into the presentation that you're going to hear from Public Works Director Zuroff. Gary is his position he has held for 5 years for the city of Dickinson. He was born and raised in eastern Montana, and he attended Carroll College, Pacific University, and Montana State University before starting his public works career 36 years ago. In addition to his work, Gary is active in the North Dakota Water Environment Association, where he currently served as president. What Gary didn't include in his bio is Gary and I worked together when I was the city administrator in Dickinson. So I hired Gary, actually, and within the first 3 years of being employed by the city of Dickinson, he supervised more projects in those 3 years than his previous 30 years for his communities in Montana. So we really educated Mr. Zuroff. So he's here to share some of his experiences and what they're doing with regards to recycled water. So Gary.
Thank you, Sean. There we go. One thing, Retha asked me to do a short bio, so I did a really short bio, which is good. But I did forget to mention that I am married, have 2 kids and 6 grandkids, just in case my wife sees this or is listening. And I started in Dickinson in 2013, and it has been a challenge. We did a lot of different infrastructure in that time frame. One thing I wanted to mention before we get started, is one of my son lives in Houston, works for Shell Oil in Houston, and he started about 2014, and he sent me an article knowing that I was near the Bakken and up in this area, and I just want to read one of the quotes from that article that he sent me. It says, one of the hottest oil territories in the nation contains a sufficient volume of sediments to make it one of the potentially greatest producing areas of the world. And that article was published in November of 1951 by S.F. Bulby, a Shell executive at the time. So it just kind of puts things in perspective to me that the area we're in. So today, a couple things I want to touch base on is the water reclamation facility in the city of Dickinson, the infrastructure that we built in a short time frame, and also how that had to be built and finished to coincide with the new refinery that was built. At that time, it was the Davis refinery, which is Endeavor, or Tesoro Endeavor Marathon, and the investments by the city and how we're using our reuse water in western North Dakota. Now in 2013 and 2014, when I started in 2013, Dickinson was the second fastest micropolitan growing city in the nation. Micropolitan, any city under 50,000. Of course, we all know that who is the first would be Williston. Dickinson always was kind of in the background, but we were growing exponentially also at the time. And with all that growth, the population expanded tremendously, and the infrastructure we had to put in the ground in the short period of time, Sean can attest, it was, I guess I'd say organized chaos, maybe at the best. We built water lines, water tanks, multiple, almost double the amount of roads in Dickinson, and with that also was the wastewater system. Dickinson's wastewater system prior to the big boom in 2013 and before had already, I guess, achieved its capacity. And so they actually started looking at a new system in 2010. And at that time, they were looking at just some minor upgrades, didn't know which direction to go. There was all sorts of possibilities, upcoming EPA regulations. But luckily, they picked a facility that would meet all the future requirements and the needs for the area, and it's still meeting the needs, and will be the future needs for the area. The design was called an IFAS system, an integrated fixed field activated sludge system, easy for me to say. But it was designed to meet the most stringent North Dakota regulations. It was also designed so it can be expanded to meet future increase in population. And the quality of the reuse water, it's one of the most stringent in North Dakota. So with that plant, it also had to coincide with the construction of the Dakota Prairie Refinery at the time. I wanted to put this slide, this is more just about the plant itself, about how it's expandable, which is very positive, but I'm talking today about reuse water and how we use the municipal wastewater as reuse water. So our ability to provide reuse water to the area is only on what population we have currently in the city of Dickinson in the area. So as the population grows, also does our source of water grow, because we can't produce any more water than what we get in the sanitary sewer system. A couple things about the plant. It was the first type of IFAS system in North Dakota. It was the first area-wide reuse water system that was developed. When we did do the construction, like I said, it coincided with the refinery, which included a 11-mile pipeline from the plant to the refinery. The city at the time, the elected officials, and the administration decided to increase the size of that reuse line. In other words, Dakota Prairie only needed I think it was a 4-inch line to the refinery. The city decided they wanted to upsize it to a 12-inch line to maximize the ability to use the reuse water, which was, of course, at a cost. But I think between the administration at the time, including Mr. Kessel, it was well done. Also, with the system, we added a reuse booster station, and with that treatment of the water, we needed somewhere to store that treated water. So the city of Dickinson right now, we have about 2 million gallons a day coming to our plant. When the use of the reuse water beyond the refinery, when they want water, they want an extremely a lot of water when they're fracking. So we can't continually provide that quantity of water with just what's coming in from the system. So we supplemented it by having 140 million gallons of storage and building the reuse water system to maximize the volume of water going through that line. In this graph, you can see the purple line or the pink line is a reuse line from our water reclamation facility to Dakota Prairie Refinery at the time. The city spent dollars to upsize that line. Also, we take the wastewater from the refinery, and that makes a loop back to the city of Dickinson. Just in this graph itself, just on the wastewater system, there's the reuse line. You can see the Highway 10 lift, which Dakota Prairie built, but then the rest of the lift stations in the line, including the plant, was City of Dickinson infrastructure build. And just this system here, I estimated about $50 million worth of infrastructure build to make all this happen. And I think my second month in Dickinson, you have to have all that done for the refinery within 12 months. So it was quite a challenge, and we did meet the challenge. Now, I just wanted to show you, beyond the refinery that we provide water for, we also have had agreements the last 3 years with service companies to provide the reuse water for fracking. This is just a couple of pictures, I think, taken last year of the water transfer layouts. Those that are in the business probably know this real well, but I thought I'd take a couple pictures. This just shows from our custody transfer point just north of the refinery that the tanks that they fill, and then they pump it from there beyond. And in fact, this year it's going from the Dakota Prairie Refinery north of Belfield, about 30 miles. So this shows actually last year's loop. You can see I don't know if you can see it down in there, probably where the Dakota Prairie Refinery is. They take it just north of there and pump it all the way up. You can see the lay flat pipe along the road as you do in the oil country. And I think last year there were 10 inline pumps or more to pump it north of Belfield for used for fracking. This year, I just got a text from my water reclamation manager for the month of September. We sold about 55 million gallons of reuse water to ND Energy Company, and that was piped north of Belfield in that area. 2018 and beyond, we continue to supply reuse water to the refinery. As I said, we continue to supply to ND Energy, and I have some prices in there. Of course, it depends on the drought too in the area. In that southwestern North Dakota, there's not a lot of water resource. So I think this is a great benefit for that area, and not just for the energy industry as a whole, for refineries, for fracking, but also for commercial and irrigation usage. I also wanted to say we are starting negotiations on possibly taking wastewater and supplying reuse water for a new refinery just west of Dickinson. And as I said, other uses are irrigation and commercial and industrial fire suppression has been one of the topics. That West Dickinson area, as I said, we sized for reuse water and wastewater. So that area is ready to develop, and we feel with this ability of reuse water, it would be great for industrial fire suppression or other uses. One of the things I wanted to, a little accolades, in 2014, the plant was recognized as the North Dakota Civil Engineering Plant of the Year, also with the American Public Works Association. 2016, we also got that same award for the Reuse Booster Station. The Reuse Booster Station itself was not that significant. It was a package station, but they gave us the award for what it was for and what it was used for, to expand the reuse water system in southwest North Dakota. And also, I wanted to mention that North Dakota is on the map. This spring in April, I was invited to Water Week at DC, and the Water Reuse Association invited me to speak on how reuse water is being used in the energy industry. And if you can see that on the slide, I had to follow the largest reuse system in the world in California, where they inject reuse water into aquifers. And it was quite, I thought it was quite something for Dickinson and North Dakota to be honored and be able to present at that conference. That's all I have.
Perfect timing. That was right on time, Gary. Just a reminder to text in any questions that you have. The plan is to get through all the presentations, and then afterwards we'll revisit. And if we have questions from the audience, we'll be happy to entertain those. So moving on, our next speaker is Dan Inman. He is the Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer for Minnecota's Power Cooperative. He's responsible for global leadership in the areas of information technology, operational technology, systems operations, and security. Under Dan's leadership, Minnesota implements programs and technologies that ensure the safe, reliable, and secure transmission of electricity on our nation's grid. He is a veteran. He serves in the Air National Guard, or did, while he was at the University of North Dakota. He received a Bachelor in Science and Electrical Engineering with minors in Math and Computer Science. Upon graduation, he's employed as electrical engineer at Ideal Aerosmith in East Grand Forks, Minnesota, where he assisted in software and hardware development for motion testing solutions for aviation, defense, and automotive industries. He started working with Minnesota Power in 2007 in the telecommunications engineering department, working on design, implementation, and maintenance of Minnesota's telecommunication infrastructure. In 2012, Dan was promoted to compliance manager, and during the same year received his MBA with the specialization in project management. In 2017, he was promoted to vice president and was also selected as the honorary commander for the 69th Maintenance Squadron at the Grand Forks Air Force Base. The Honorary Commander program provides an in-depth look at activities occurring at the Air Force Base and provides military personnel an opportunity to learn more about local businesses and community leaders. In the same year, Dan was selected as a member of the University of North Dakota College of Engineering and Mines Executive Board. Whew, that was a lot. Dan, thank you for your service, and we look forward to your presentation on cybersecurity.
Right, appreciate that. Thank you. Let's see, I had a segment in here that I'll actually skip through since Stacy Dahl did such a great job talking about Minnesota Power being a transmission and generation provider. Clicker, there we go. One of the things I did want to talk about cybersecurity is everybody knows what cybersecurity is, right? Everybody's been impacted by cybersecurity, and we'll have an example here a little bit later as I get through some of these slides here. One thing that sets us a little bit apart from some of the areas of cybersecurity from other critical infrastructure or some other industries is, so we have an OT side, and it's your traditional OT. These are the guys that are actually making sure you are working on getting paid through your accounting department. They're getting equipment in through your procurement department. They're providing information to your HR department. Everything on a daily basis. Your business continuity guys. These are your IT guys. And they do a great job. Their purpose is to exchange information. There's a constant balance with these guys because they have to exchange information And there's a little bit of customer support with that as well. Now, with the utility side, we have that IT guys, but we also have the OT guys. Now, what I mean by OT is that operational technology. So our goal is to make sure at the end of the day and all throughout the day that we can deliver secure, cost-effective energy to our membership 24/7. So in order to do that, we have generation and transmission assets that are out there going all the time to make sure that we can keep the lights on. So our operational technology staff, those are very similar to IT. So the skill sets are very similar to IT. A lot of the equipment's very similar to the traditional IT. But their focus is OT, keeping the lights on. So some of the big differences that you'll see there is they're more in tune with locking stuff down. Oh, did you need access to that? You're not getting access to that. So that's part of our operational technology side. So it's a little bit different world for our OT guys compared to our IT guys. Which one to grab? All right, you made it look so easy. There we go. All right, so we're going to talk about some of the disruptors that we're seeing on the utility side. I look at those disruptors as some of the risks that are out there. So, okay, through the audience, how many have been impacted or know somebody that's been impacted by social engineering? Oh, there's got to be more hands than that. You got an email account? Okay, so it's everywhere, right? So social engineering is one of those things that we're seeing definitely an uptick in. So we're getting very strategically spearfishing type of campaigns that are focusing strictly on our executive staff. And we're also getting stuff that's coming in that looks like it might be from our procurement department saying, hey, guess what? You owe us money. Here's an invoice. And they want you to click on it. So we're seeing a lot of those different social engineering and phishing campaigns coming out currently in our industry. So one thing to note is, I should have said this early on, so happy Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So hopefully you all learn a little bit about cybersecurity today because it is October, which is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. We really promote cybersecurity internally at Minn-Kota because we know that our staff is our best defense as it relates to some of these type of attacks. Now, that being said, I can put a whole bunch of equipment up to protect our assets on the IT and OT side against the different type of attacks that are out there. But the issue is if our staff aren't trained and they're aware of some of the conditions that are out there, they can open up a door to the outside world. And that's one thing that we want to make sure that we don't do. Again, we're focused on keeping the lights on. Cybersecurity helps us do that. Everybody's tied in one way or another. Going back to some of the internal risks, culture. Now, up here, Midwestern personality, North Dakota nice, everybody wants to help everybody out. Not the best attitude as it relates to security, right? So just imagine sitting in a conference, not devoted to security, because now I've already put your wits at end saying, okay, he's gonna pull something. I'm not, but just imagine being in a conference and all of a sudden the instructor, whoever's giving the presentation, and yells out and says, you know what? I was going to show you this example of the new protocols that are in your credit cards. And he goes, grabs his wallet, and he goes looking for a credit card. He goes, oh, crap, I left that Visa card on the dresser. Does anybody in the audience have a Visa card I could use? So honestly, don't raise your hands, but how many of you would actually get in your pocket, pull out that Visa card and say, I'm going to help you out? That's kind of our culture here. We want to do the right thing. We want to help our friends out. We want to make sure that things go well. So on a security front, that can be a little scary. So we're seeing an uptick on the utility side. A lot of cybersecurity attacks are going on. Now, some of them are actually making the news. I'll talk a little bit about some of them here too. They're getting a little scary out there, I'll be honest. So right now, every year we're seeing something new. 2015, we saw Ukraine got hit. Ukraine got hit really bad. But depending on which resource you actually read, anywhere between 40 to 280,000 people were without power. Individuals got in through a phishing account. Somebody opened up an attachment that they shouldn't. Somebody started looking and watching what these guys were doing on a daily basis. And the next thing you know, they took control of their system and started opening up circuit breakers at different substations. When you open up circuit breakers at different substations that weren't planned, things go boom. Electricity goes down, people have no power, and that's exactly what happened in this event. A lot of that could have been taken place by just monitoring what you're seeing on a phishing attempt. Something doesn't feel right, don't click on it. If you and your wife are sitting there and all of a sudden you get an email from Amazon, say, hey, your package has arrived, click here. And you look over at your wife, did you order me something? No, I thought you ordered me something. Neither one of you did that, don't click on that. Ask questions. If it doesn't feel right, don't click on it. So some of the attacks that we're also seeing out there, this last one. So in the media, back in March, there was an article that said, United States utility control centers hacked by Russia. Anybody see that? Okay, it hit pretty hard. Usually when we see free advertisement like that, we get a few more knocks on our firewall at our utility. What that actually meant is, yes, the Department of Homeland Security did report that somebody got into a utilities generation control center. It was not a transmission. It was a generation facilities control center. It didn't do anything. The reason they know that happened is actually we're monitoring some of the indicators that are out there, and they were actually reproducing what they actually saw. So first thing when I got that in March, I'm like, okay, crap, did that happen to us? So the Department of Homeland Security, and also it was EISAC. EISAC is one of those NERC-supplied federal regulators that gives us information. So it stands for Electricity Information Sharing and Analyst Center. So we get a lot of information from EISAC and others as well. They sent us a report and said, hey, keep out a guard for these kind of information. So anything that's coming in that looks like this IP address. So the first thing we do is go through the various log files of all of our assets just to make sure, okay, this didn't hit us. And luckily it didn't hit us. So we didn't see any activities. That doesn't mean we don't see activities. The stuff you guys are seeing at home, we see it large on our utility side. For example, CryptoLocker, one of those software that's out there that likes to lock down everything on your hard drive at home, and if you don't pay a ransom, you don't get your files. So we've seen that in the utility industry too. Luckily, we do have restoration recovery plans and other processes and procedures that helps us continue to keep the lights on, keep businesses performing as usual, but we're seeing the same kind of issues that you're seeing at home, along with some of the other stuff that are related to the state-sponsored attack. So the one that I mentioned earlier in March was Russia. EISAC did come up and say, hey, guess what? This was a Russia activity. We know it. Won't tell you exactly how we know it, but we know it. So these are some of the things that we're seeing on a daily basis as it relates to some of the risks that are out there internally and externally for Minn Kota Power and a lot of the other utilities across the United States. And risk. So we'll talk about a little bit of the risk on the cooperative reputation side. Now, we've got a very good trust factor, I believe, with our cooperative members. As Stacy indicated, we got about 150,000 members that we deliver on the end user side, and we got a pretty good reputation with them. So one of the biggest fears I got out there is losing that trust that they've got in with us, protecting our assets. I'll give you a quick example. In 2017, early in the year, first quarter, there was an article that the Wall Street Journal identified stating that first U.S. utility has been hacked. Didn't give a lot of details in that article, except for they did say it was a Vermont utility. So a couple weeks later, they actually figured out who it actually was. Unfortunately, what they actually found was an EISAC report was sent out saying, hey, we got some bad stuff going on. Go take a look at your stuff and see if you see any indicators of that. This company did. It actually saw a laptop that had an IP address related to what was identified, and the next thing you know, they did what they were supposed to do and reported that to the federal side. Somehow the information got leaked, and they found themselves in a whole bunch of papers. So that really hurts the reputation for that company, and that's something that we're all worried about. So that's a little bit the IT risks, some of the disruptors that are out there. On the OT side, we see some of the same stuff. Now, the risk factors are a little bit different because on the IT side, those guys are connected out to the internet. They get emails, so they have a higher risk profile as it relates to cybersecurity. Now, on the OT side, they're buried multiple different levels into our infrastructure, and they have a little bit different methodology and philosophy on how they handle cybersecurity. So these guys have no connection out to the internet, no connection out to emails. So the risk footprint for which these guys work are actually reduced quite a bit. but they still see some of the same stuff and say potential. Again, I go back to the end users that might have access to some of these. If they're transitioning files, which we have processes and procedures identifying how and what you can transition from one system to another, if they're transitioning files and they think they followed the right process, they inadvertently could open it up to other vulnerabilities. And we have multiple different layers to help us with some of these possibly human performance issues that might develop. They are actually the big bullseye right in the center of what you're seeing on some of these state-sponsored cyber attacks. These are what they're going for. They really want to knock out our generation facilities. They really want to knock out our transmission facilities. And these also have a fair, they have that reputational factor with our co-ops too. They have the trust that those guys are doing what they need to do to ensure that we're keeping the lights on for them. We do a lot of different things to mitigate all the various risks that are out there. We do internal audits. We actually have regulatory compliance obligations from NERC, basically for the critical infrastructure protection of our national standards that are out there. Basically what this means is you're going to follow these regulatory requirements or you're going to get a fine. The fines can exceed or go up to $1 million for every day that violation is found. So if you have a violation that's on that high risk factor and that violation's been in there for a year, there's your $365 million fine. No, that hasn't happened, but just articulate that's the kind of regulatory compliance obligations that we're under. Now our board's given us strict directives that we're going to do everything that we can to make sure that we're 100% compliant all the time. So compliance is our baseline philosophy as we talk about frameworks to managing the different things that are out there as it relates to processes and procedures. NERC compliance, critical infrastructure protection, that's our baseline. Then we look out there at our specific risks and identify, okay, how are we going to manage this situation? Compliance isn't quite doing it for us. We need to make sure that we're secure. So in the event that we're secure, we're doing the right things as it relates to good industry best practices, our compliance expectations are going to be met. So we do a lot of that as well. Information sharing. We spent a lot of time establishing relationships with Department of Homeland Security, FBI, North Dakota's Fusion Center, which has been a great partner with the utilities in North Dakota, getting information and actually getting information that's usable. Some of these EISAC reports that I talk about, a lot of information comes in on a weekly basis. One of the things that we got to be concerned with is, okay, what don't we know? What's the next thing coming around the corner? So the North Dakota Fusion Center has taken upon itself to create an area so which we can get confidential information that hasn't been released, hasn't been unclassified, to the right individuals within organizations that are allowed to see that so that we can take actionable processes to get rid of some of the vulnerabilities that are out there. Now, it's not perfect, meaning those generation facility control centers that we were talking about in March that were hacked and we got the notifications, that actually happened in last year, 2017, in spring or in fall. It took us a while to get the unclassified information and the indicators saying, hey, look out for this stuff. And we're using a lot of technology too. Technology has given us a lot of innovations so that we can kind of streamline some of our processes and produce a lot of defense in-depth approach to security. That wasn't me, by the way, I'm just saying. And IT-OT convergence, I mentioned those two areas have a different philosophy. What we've done is we actually combine them under one area so they can help each other out. So you got like-minded folks talking about different things and different risks that are impacting us from a global perspective. It helps keep costs down too, because then they can actually use each other as a backboard to say, hey, I got this risk. How can we utilize a specific resource, technology or staff, to manage that risk for both of us? So it's been really beneficial to kind of group these guys together so they can handle some of those risks. Some of the cybersecurity challenges ahead of us, these state-sponsored attacks, you know, we got 400 employees. We cover about 34,500 square miles. We cover Minnesota and North Dakota in certain areas. These guys have whole states and deep pockets, and they're coming after us. So we're really reliant on that information management to get the information to us as quick as they can, so that we can actually take actionable steps to reduce some of the things that are out there that may impact us and help us keep the lights on. We're also looking and continue to have problems finding and retaining those cybersecurity professionals. It took us a year to find a cybersecurity specialist for EmPower in Grand Forks. Now, a lot of the issues It's difficult for us to compete with the bigger cities. As far as the company-wise, we offer a great benefit package. We got a great community. We're in North Dakota, so it's a great community to raise kids. But the word isn't getting out there. So we're still losing a lot of staff that are going through the colleges, and the colleges have done a great job at focusing their curriculums lately into cybersecurity. This has been a huge deal for us because we've got about 4.5 million openings over the next 10 years in IT and cybersecurity that's going to be not filled without us doing something. So the university systems in North Dakota have done a great job at getting people elevated to that level, but we're still having problems getting those qualified staff. Another area is research. So artificial intelligence. There's such an opportunity out there to deploy artificial intelligence to make things a little bit easier for us to identify some of those cybersecurity issues that are out there. I know the University of North Dakota has got a whole program devoted to different researches that are out there related to big data, all sorts of different things as well. So research is definitely going to be a milestone for us to help us combat some of the issues that are related to cybersecurity. I get up here, I start talking about cybersecurity, I get a little excited, so I don't know if I hit the buzzer yet, but okay, I just hit the buzzer. Perfect timing. So with that being said, I'm going to pass the mic over.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate your enthusiasm. Our last speaker today, on this panel anyways, is Ross Manson. Ross is the Chief Innovation Officer at Eide Bailly. In this position, Ross fosters a culture of innovation, finding ways for the firm to remain relevant in the dramatically changing business world. He builds a culture of innovation through our people, services, industries, and offices, and helps the firm analyze how innovation can benefit internal processes, products, and services, and the client experience. Ross has more than 24 years of accounting and consulting experience with Eide Bailly. His main focus area in working with clients is within the healthcare industry. This work includes financial feasibility studies, productivity and operational analysis, strategy development for healthcare organizations, and the Affordable Care Act, i.e. the healthcare reform, and the implications on both healthcare providers but also to employers. Ross is going to talk to us today about blockchain and introduce us to this subject. Ross?
All right, thanks, Sean. All right, so my first question for the group is, who here has heard of Satoshi Nakamoto? All right. For those of you that raised your hand, are any of you Satoshi Nakamoto? Satoshi Nakamoto is what got blockchain started around 2008, 2009, shortly after the financial crisis. What's believed to be, nobody has ever met Satoshi Nakamoto, but it's believed to be a group of programmers that came together and developed really a cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, which many of you have probably heard of, but it was built on the foundation of a technology called blockchain. And it's taken some time for blockchain to really become formational, but it is gaining much more steam as we're seeing some of the applications that have been used from a Bitcoin perspective, but also a number of other business use cases as well too. So I'm sure everybody has heard of Bitcoin, and the first thing that I want to make sure that people understand is that Bitcoin and blockchain are two very different things. Bitcoin is a cryptocurrency, a token that trades back and forth, and there's a value associated with it. I'm sure last year you saw there was a run up on Bitcoin at the end of the year. It reached about $20,000 from a per coin basis. But blockchain is a technology that is used, it's really a database. And it is a digitized database, a distributed ledger that provides access to all kinds of different records that are stored on this blockchain. And so you can see here, the description of it is it's a digitized, a distributed ledger. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but primarily show you some slides as to how it works. Because what you'll find about blockchain is that it takes some time to get your arms around it. It isn't something that you come and you hear a 10-minute speech on and you're like, oh, now I know what blockchain is. You've really got to digest it and understand what the capabilities of it are. But as you can see, it's a digitized ledger. It's a peer-to-peer technology that has a group dynamic related to it. It's immutable. So, when you hear immutable, it means that it is very difficult for it to be corrupted or hacked, for that sense. And when a lot of people will ask me when I talk about blockchain, and then by no means do I consider myself a blockchain expert. So when Sean and I talked originally, I said, look, if you want anybody to go deep and dive into a blockchain technology discussion, you should be looking somewhere else. But when you talk about immutability and you hear a lot of people that have had things hacked related around that, the primary thing that has been being hacked from in the blockchain and cryptocurrency space is digitized wallets, your digital wallet. So, the best way to describe it is that when you create a digital wallet, I have a physical wallet here, right? If I left this on this table, more than likely, I wouldn't be able to come back here in an hour and pick it up. Now, I know North Dakota is pretty nice, but and maybe I would be lucky. But that's what happens is that a lot of people leave their digital wallets out there for them to be hacked through different cybersecurity capabilities. But blockchain, for the most part, is very, very difficult. I never want to say never, but it is very difficult and immutable. And so if you think about a transaction of blocks, and I'll describe this in a few slides, but it has a number of different links and hashes that are recorded next to it. So there's a thumbprint or a fingerprint that's associated with each one. And you would have to go through that entire chain to get back to the original place of a transaction that you wanted to corrupt to correct it going forward, and that gets very difficult based on computing power and the digitization of the ledger itself. It's a lot, and Sean, I think, talked about this in regards to what we're seeing from a Bailey perspective in accounting, but a lot of businesses are being disrupted in a number of different ways. Disintermediation is a phrase that we're hearing quite often out there, and what you're seeing with blockchain is it has the potential to change the central authority figure. A lot of different parties rely on a lot of different organizations and transactions require third parties to be able to validate it. If things are stored, on a transactional basis through a blockchain that's immutable, now all of a sudden you start to disrupt those third-party organizations. And I'll talk a little bit about where we're seeing some primary use cases here shortly. The information can be added very fast and seamless from a real-time perspective on the blockchain as well too. So that's some of the idiosyncrasies and aspects that people are looking at it from a business process perspective. So if you can see this here, I put this. How many of you are familiar with Gartner's hype cycle for emerging technologies? Gartner is a national research organization that does a fantastic job of talking about emerging technologies and different business trends that are happening. And you can see they've got this hype cycle that has an innovation trigger where there's a ton of hype related around a particular emerging technology, and you can see all kinds of people taking a look at it. Then you've got the peak of inflated expectations, the trough of disillusionment, and then you get into the slope of enlightenment and also the plateau of productivity where it really starts to become, business operational. And if you can see right here is where blockchain is. It is on that path that it's reached the peak and it's coming down here from a peak of inflated expectations on that path to becoming somewhere in much more from a productivity basis perspective within business applications. So it's not necessarily something that is in place today, although there are a number of different softwares out there and technologies like Hyperledger Fabric. You're seeing blockchain as a service from Amazon Web Services, from Microsoft, the Azure platform, and all these different capabilities. But it's not mainstream and it's not widespread use right now. We're seeing some small use cases. One big one that was really announced here a couple of weeks ago that I'll talk about in a second. I think the other thing to realize about blockchain is there are different types of blockchains. There are 3 different types of blockchains to familiarize yourself with. The first one is a public blockchain, and think of Bitcoin. So it's a very large distributed blockchain that has a token associated with it generally. Does anybody have any idea how many different tokens are out there in the cryptocurrency space right now? Oh, last time I looked, it was about 1,500. So you can imagine the regulation related around trying to different cryptocurrencies and those things out there. But there's a lot of different, players that have jumped in. Kodak, even if you remember a year or so ago, made a run at a cryptocurrency as well too, and saw a spike in their stock. But public blockchains, think of Bitcoin, Ethereum, are public blockchains. They're open to anyone to participate, and they have open source. So a lot of people are participating in those. Permission blockchains, think of Ripple. We're seeing Ripple in a lot of financial institution areas, has rules of how individuals can play within that network. It's still large and distributed, and sometimes it can be an open source network, sometimes it won't be. And then you'll see the third one is private blockchains. And they tend to be smaller, and I think this is where we're going to see a lot of use cases from a private exchange perspective with businesses. So in the oil and gas, in the energy area, we'd see different companies that are putting things on a private blockchain. Now I do think eventually how things will translate as we see the government, federal and state agencies putting things on a blockchain because of its immutability, because of its transaction capabilities, where we're going to see a lot of public and private blockchains that are working in some way harmonious together to share information back and forth. This is the best way to depict it from a visualization perspective, is many different databases have a central authority, and you can see that on the far left of the different pictures. And so a number of different attachments will go into a centralized location. And that's what's made it very easy for some cybersecurity functionalities, is to go out after that one location. You have all those different dots on there that are, well, they're your greatest resource, they're also your greatest opportunity for a potential flood or hack. And then you've got a decentralized network where you have more nodes there, but then you have a distributed network. And you can see that there are a copy of that database that I talked about, that distributed ledger, that is recorded on every single one of those distributed networks. And how it works is, think of a book, all right? So a book, as you take a look at it, a blockchain is just a file that sits on a computer. It's called a node. If you hear different things, basically those nodes, those cloud computing capabilities, that's what you're seeing out there. So this file, this database, sits on those blocks, all right, in that computer. And each block in that chain, think of a page in a book. And every page is a single block that records a number of different transactions. And every different blockchain has its different consensus protocols, its different hash algorithms, the different size of the transactions that will record on a block. And so you can see, why there's a number of them out there. But every page then has its own information to record that transaction. And again, what I talked about, it's very immutable, so it's hard to change. But then what happens as you roll over to the next block, the next page, is there's a digital fingerprint, that hash that I talked about, that recognizes that it's tied to the previous block, which is tied to every single other block in that chain as well too. And that's how you start to see that it gets very difficult to affect a blockchain, to hack into a blockchain. And here's just the way it is, and you can see how that fingerprint flows through. And like I said, every single block doesn't include just one transaction. It typically includes a number of different transactions. So, a couple of use cases really quickly. I don't know if any of you saw this, but the two biggest use cases that we're seeing right now from a blockchain perspective are in supply chain areas, especially in food safety. Walmart, 2 weeks ago, launched that they are implementing the IBM blockchain for their food traceability and their green leaf produce. So they're starting with lettuce and other different green leaf producers around the country, around the world for that matter, is that they are requiring from the source, from when the crop is planted to when it hits the stores in Walmart, everything will be recorded on a blockchain. All right, and what they've said is that they are planning to roll this out, and that will be done in the next 18 months. And then what they've also said is that they plan to roll that out to different fruit and vegetables as well too. And we've seen a number of different, salmonella outbreaks, and trying to find where those occur. This can help speed up that process to identify the exact, lettuces and the farms that it went to. Because what you'll find is that you'll identify where it was recorded, how it was shipped, how it was cleaned, how it was transmitted to the store, and then prior to being sold. We're seeing it done in coffee. I know a number of different coffee distributors and coffee organizations are finding that they're even recording, because of the different RTLS and RFID capabilities that exist out there, being able to demonstrate that this coffee bean was grown in Honduras on this farm field at this humidity, which gives it a better flavor from a richness perspective. I mean, it's incredible the possibilities that will be out there in the future. The other one that, other use case that we're seeing a lot of is in the financial services area. And JP Morgan has been one of the leaders in this space, and they've created a blockchain project called Quorum. And they've actually been considering spinning this off because it has so many different applications within the financial institutions industry and financial services area, especially as you start to take a look at different transactions of cross-border payments. And cross-border payments are still built on a very old technology that costs a lot of money to do a transaction across border, and it still takes, in many cases, 3 to 5 days. And in today's environment, how fast things can be occurring from a transactional perspective through electronic transfers, it seems like it shouldn't be taking 3 to 5 days. And we're seeing a lot of different financial institutions start to say, okay, we've got to figure out a better way to do this, and blockchain is one of those. The last thing that I'll leave you with is, from a blockchain perspective, and I know we've got time for questions as well too, is that when the internet, the internet was really created, and it provided, a way for us to share and distribute and access information. All right? What blockchain has the capability for us to do is to share and distribute value. And that's very different than it is from an informational perspective. And that's where we're seeing a lot of different use cases that are coming in. And I did take a look, as Sean had indicated, most of my life has been spent working with healthcare providers across the country. But we're seeing, actually the third area that I would say that we're seeing a lot of use cases is within the healthcare space. But I did find in my research and coming here from an energy perspective is that there will be a lot of use cases from an oil and gas perspective. And I think I have another slide here on the Gartner Hype Cycle that shows where blockchain as a business is. And you can see I think I got somewhere here is oil and gas, right? Blockchain and oil and gas right there. So it says that it's about, if you follow the indicator, it's still in that innovation trigger here, all right? But it's about 5 to 10 years on a run-out perspective for the oil and gas industry from the energy perspective. And what they talked a lot about as I was researching it for the energy industry is it talked a lot about the procurement to payment aspects of how blockchain can really reduce the time effectiveness from a procurement to payment perspective, can really help with business processes, which can be very very difficult from a transaction perspective of identifying the volume and the different energy recording, different aspects from a field perspective, but then also the other aspects of how it could work with the land and title companies in regard. It looks like that if you want to drill for oil, there is a lot of different investigation that you have to do to make sure that you've got the mineral rights, the land and the title associated with the right people and everything. And if federal and state governments start to record things on a blockchain from a land title mineral rights perspective, that can make that process much more seamless and much faster to make sure that you're accessing the right records, the right people, and move things along in a much more timely basis, especially from your perspective on that. And that's all I had.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate that, Ross. Retha, I'm wondering, is there anybody who submitted questions for our panelists?
Yes, we have a couple, and actually one for each. So I'll start with one of the earlier questions regarding water for Gary. How expensive is the infrastructure investment for water recycling? If a new system were put in place, how long would the payoff time be?
I guess that's kind of tough. Most cities, especially as they grow, grow from a, like I mentioned, a facultative lagoon or a pond system to a mechanical treatment plant. And so depending on, how your city is, if you're going to develop a new treatment plant, invest in new technology, you have to do that to meet certain requirements if you discharge that water to receiving streams. So to take the next step and treat it to sell it for reuse isn't that big a step. So actually the cost there isn't a very big gap. You know, the plant itself, the IFAS system was, I think, a little over $30 million. But most wastewater plants, water treatment plants generate revenue. They sell water. Wastewater treatment plants don't usually generate revenue. They treat water and make it ability to send it to a receiving stream. This treatment plant generates revenue. In fact, the last 3 or 4 years, our revenue has covered our operation and maintenance for the plant, not our debt service, which Senator Ward is going to keep helping us with. But it does create revenue, you know, so I hope I answered that question.
All right, thank you very much. Another question, this would be regarding cybersecurity. How does marijuana legalization throughout the country and what is on the ballot here in North Dakota in the fall impact the cybersecurity workforce crunch?
Oh, you gave me a hard one. Why can't it be just electrons going from one place to another? So the only thing I can say on that, that's not, it's not going to actually impact cybersecurity as it relates to somebody pushing a button and trying to get into our system. Where it's going to impact is the policies for which, from a human resource perspective, for which we have to take certain actions. So pros, cons, I'm not following a whole lot of that myself. I know that there's going to be an impact on the workforce, on how companies adopt, depending on what direction it actually takes. I just don't have anything good to say about that one. Feel like Forrest Gump for a second there. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to answer that more than saying that it's going to be more of an HR policy change for companies compared to what they're doing. You look at the military, for example. So those guys deal with top secret stuff. And you've got certain states that do have, that do operate where marijuana is legal. So Colorado, for example. So the federal government still states that that's not legal. So those individuals that are working on top secret information as it relates to government, whatever, A, B, and C, aircraft, nuclear, doesn't matter, they still have to follow those federal guidelines. So to maintain their security clearances. Now, not everybody in the utility world in North Dakota is going to have a security clearance that they have to be worried about. That's going to be something that we're going to have to be considerate of as we see some of those policies possibly change for us moving forward into the future.
Thank you. Ross, can you explain why blockchain systems are such huge users of power?
Well, it gets into, you know, really as you take a look at that, it's not an efficient mechanism right now when you talk about public blockchains. So if you go back to that, you know, picture where I had the three different, the centralized, the decentralized, and then the distributed network, is on that distributed network, there is a copy of that blockchain on every single one of those nodes, those computers out there. And so, you know, that's not an efficient way necessarily from a computing power perspective, because every single one of those, to maintain the authority going forward and to do the consensus protocols and the hash algorithms, every single one of those have to validate that transaction for it to be stamped and put into the blockchain. So it consumes a lot of power. And that's really the, you know, one of the inefficiencies when we get into public blockchains that will have to become, you know, continuously thought out. And you're seeing, you know, different farms around the country that are continuing to be looked at, because every single one of those nodes serves a purpose to the blockchain, and that's how they get paid. So those people that are, you hear the miners and those things out there, they're the ones that are validating the transactions, and then they get paid a portion of that Bitcoin or that Ethereum network or that Ethereum, you know, coin to be paid for validating that transaction. But it does consume a lot of computing power. You know, the other thing that I'd want to mention for use cases is a phrase that you'll hear called smart contracts. And I think that this is really where you're going to see a lot of use cases from a business perspective. And a smart contract effectively is a contract that is being executed through an Internet of Things, and it's really having very little validation that is happening from any manual process or person through that contract. So it's taking a written contract, it's digitizing it onto the blockchain, and it's, through the algorithms, it's providing a number of if-then, statements that are substantiating that if this happens, then this happens from a smart contract perspective. And we are seeing, a lot of different use cases that are starting to meticulate through businesses in a smart contract basis. And I think that we will see a significant enhancement of those for businesses as we go forward into the future. Now, the other thing that I would want to mention on blockchain is that blockchain, a lot of people will come around and they'll tell you that, I'm into blockchain because I want to change the world. And I hear that quite often from different kids. No offense to you young people sitting over there that are aspiring to change the world. But blockchain has its use cases. They're still very, small right now. And just because you figure out what your business problem is, and then ask the question whether blockchain would serve a purpose or not to do it. But blockchain will not serve every business purpose out there. So don't make that misnomer out there where you're hearing a lot of people say, well, you put it on a blockchain, but sometimes it doesn't make sense because of computing power and all these other factors as well too. Sorry to be long-winded.
That's all right. This one is for Dan. What is the greatest physical security threat to a power company like Minn Kota?
Oh, let's see. So we've been pretty fortunate from physical security. So we see some of the stuff that we're seeing out there is somebody out during hunting season trying to bring in their scope, end up shooting one of our components out in the substation. We haven't seen direct terrorist activity or real strong cases of vandalism as it relates to the bulk electric system. California, on the other hand, back in 2014, a substation called Metcalf was blown up for about 15-20 minutes with an AK-47 and took out the whole substation for almost about 9 months. The transformers for that one facility, about a year long to try to get something in there to be replaced. So it might be because we have more rural substations that aren't seeing the attention of wandering eyes compared to what they're seeing in San Jose with the Metcalf substation scenario. The biggest threat that we see in the substation is really Mother Nature, realistically. We just had a windstorm that hit us June 28th and knocked down a certain number of lines in our transmission grid, steel poles, steel lines, and it actually pulled the cable out of our substation. That's probably the biggest impact we've seen on our system in, well, I've been there for about 11 years, so since I've been there.
All right, this is another one that's regarding cybersecurity. There was an announcement of China altering motherboards at the point of manufacture. I guess, is that a concern, and what can you do with reports like that?
I'm not laughing because it's a hoax. I'm laughing because I just got done reading another article on this just recently. Elemental is the name of the company that was actually supplying these motherboards for servers throughout the United States. That include Amazon, Apple, the government. There has been reports that China did take those servers, and the motherboard itself did place a IC, a integrated circuit the size of a pinhead on this motherboard, and it was a very dumb controller. Its whole purpose was to go out and communicate to the internet where it would actually get more instructions to exfiltrate information out to whoever was collecting it. Supply chain, it all comes down to supply chain. On that issue there, on the utility side, we, again, are regulated. We do what we need to do to make sure that we are following all the regulations out there, and the regulators are looking at a supply chain reliability standard that we'll be looking at following. And there's a very short window for this, so we're probably going to be following that within the next 2 years. How, the articles at least that I read, it would have been very difficult to actually see that integrated circuit on that motherboard that gets taken and put into a server that consisted of almost, I can't remember if it was 80 or 90% of our servers at the time, and I don't know if this issue was last year or 5 years ago. I don't recall exactly time frame for this. But in that situation, it would have been very difficult for us to actually see something happening and identify it. So supply chain, it comes down to that. You need to make sure that you trust who you're getting your products from, that you do some kind of background check on these guys. All of us like to save money, but lowest cost doesn't necessarily mean the best for you. For example, Cisco. well-known name, great product, has a router. You got a model number. If you're out there looking to save money, you might go out to the internet and type in that model number and say, hey, these guys got it here for 20 bucks less than everybody else. Let's go with those. Well, the problem is you don't know if it went to China or these other state-sponsored entities, and they touched it, and then, by the way, they sent it to you. And it is happening. It is out there. Cisco was one of the ones that had recently had some events like that, not necessarily to the point of Elemental, but it's happening. Not to Cisco's fault. They're producing a good product. Somebody's buying it, taking it, putting it in a chop shop, making some modifications, and giving it back to the end user and hoping they put it in some critical infrastructure or someplace else where they can steal intellectual property. So it comes down to supply chain.
All right, and another blockchain question. How could blockchain come into play in the energy industry with power outages that are caused by weather or other events where traditional transmission grids are down?
Oh boy, that's blockchain 202, I would say, but I will take a stab at it. So on a power outage, I would imagine that there could be some way that you would be recording information from a blockchain to distinguish when different users were back up and running, and if there's any kind of cost or remediation that needs to happen from a power outage perspective is really the only thing that I can think of offhand. Sorry.
That's okay, because I got another blockchain one for you too to follow up on. Does blockchain threaten the current business models of banks and other third-party financial intermediaries?
Okay, that one I'll take a better stab at. We've been approached with that question that, and again, a lot of people say that blockchain is going to disintermediate accounting profession in regards to audit. And, initially I would have said that blockchain has a big impact from a financial institutions or even from an audit perspective of us from an Eide Bailly. But the more that you see the application and how it provides, it actually, I think, is a very a way to enhance both the financial services sector and even us from an audit perspective to make audits more relevant, to enhance the timeliness, from a financial institution perspective of payment remediation and cross-border payments and those type of factors. Does it have an impact on both business models? Absolutely. But I do not believe that it is the death knell that a lot of people will say that it's out there. So now, both of us at Eide Bailly, as we take a look at its use cases and in the financial services sector, have to continuously be factoring it into their dynamics and their speed, because there will be other fintechs. And we're seeing a lot of different fintechs that are utilizing blockchain technology or other aspects of their digital transformations that are having an impact, and they're going to have to be react quicker, I do believe.
All right, thank you very much. Do we have any other questions from the audience? All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
All right, before we get to our last speaker of the day, Governor Burgum, before he's able to come up, I do want to take a couple moments just to thank and acknowledge the wonderful planning committee and the BSC team that helped us run this conference this year. From Senator Hoeven's office, Andrew Malloy. From Senator Heitkamp's office, Joanne Beckman and Ross Keyes. From Congressman Kramer's office, Rick Collins. From Governor Burgum's office, Aaron Weber. From KLJ's office, Kaylee Richards, Jill Belkey, Emily Dalzell, and Jesse Thomas. From the North Dakota Department of Commerce, Sean Kessel, who provided, obviously, a great amount of support when we asked him if he would moderate the panel in addition to being on the committee here today. So thank you for stepping up to that, Sean. And from Bismarck State College, we have a long list of people that I would like to thank. But first and foremost, Emily Cash and Mary Morrell, without whose help and assistance, I would not be able to be up here today and run this conference as well as I was able to. So a big thank you to the two of those. Courtney Reiswig, Dusty Anderson, Cole Barnhart, Darren Unterseyer, Jesse Carmen, Deb Mance, Janelle Campbell, and Roxanne Van Zomeren. So it's an absolutely wonderful team, and I would love it if you could help me acknowledge all of their hard work.
We lowered the productivity right at a time when we had a workforce shortage in healthcare. If we want to solve an issue in that industry, which is in the paper every day, and we think we're going to solve it with more regulation or more subsidies, no, we've got so much regulation that it's choking the innovation, out of it, and it not only increases cost. You guys all know, because you all come from an industry where there's regulation increases your cost, but when you regulate, you can also misallocate capital. When you tell an industry you must use this form of IT over 1,000 other forms of IT, you're misallocating capital towards, in that case, electronic healthcare records were built on a 1970s technology, with a 1980s database, but they had 2008 lobbyists. And they won the battle. They won the battle in D.C., but they didn't win it. They would never have won it in the market with the old technology. So we just don't just say it. We believe that innovation, not regulation, is the path forward. But for that to work, we have to have industry partners who are willing to invest in R&D, willing to invest in new solutions, willing to collaborate, sometimes as an industry, and are willing to respond to challenges that we might throw out to say, hey, instead of us regulating, we're just going to challenge the industry to see if they can keep innovating. So, we start always from a place of gratitude. And again, I'm grateful on behalf of myself, First Lady Catherine Helgas Burgum, and Lieutenant Governor Brent Sanford. We're grateful just to have the opportunity to serve everybody in this state. Because North Dakota, look out that window, look at the thing I'm looking at, turn around and look at that window and say, wow, what an amazing place. What an amazing place to live, and what an amazingly productive and rich place. It's just an incredible thing, and to have the opportunity to serve every day is absolutely fantastic. We've distilled down what we really want to accomplish in state government down to 6 words. We want to empower people, we want to improve lives, and we want to inspire success. And we think we can do this across every single agency in the state. This touches what we do. This is what government should do for people, and this is what we're trying to make sure we do. And it doesn't say anything in there about trying to control every aspect of people's lives, for example. We're trying to empower people. We're trying to empower organizations, to innovate and go out and lead and do things that will improve people's lives, that will inspire success. And one of the ways that we do that in partnership with all of you, because one of the ways that North Dakota has the ability to go out and do all the great things that we're going to do is because we've got such a strong and vibrant energy sector. And this energy sector has survived and gone through an interesting period of time in the last 10 years. There were 8 years where we had a federal administration that was really, in many ways, anti-agriculture, anti-energy, anti-business, anti-growth, and that was created headwinds for a lot of people in the room and a lot of people in our state. Now we've had 2 years of really, pro-business, pro-energy, pro-agriculture. And what a difference that's made, I think, for people in terms of opening up all the opportunities. And why do I prefer the second approach, not versus the first, is not about ideology. It's about the realities of our planet and what the costs are. There's lots of costs that occur to our country when we're not energy independent, or when we're not even energy dominant, if you will. There are enormous benefits that accrue to everybody and all the people that want to solve all the issues related to healthcare and education and other challenges that we have in our society. One of the ways we do that is we do that with a very strong energy sector. So to those of you that have been in the energy industry and have gone through this last 10 years, I want to say thank you for hanging in there. And I also want to say congratulations for this amazing success that's occurred during this time frame, because it's been nothing short of remarkable. This is the only sort of statistical slide I'll have in my presentation, but I want to bring this thing out. It's interesting. From the time when I graduated from high school back in the 1970s, when we were having one of the first oil shocks, oil embargoes that was going on happened again when about time I was in grad school, but we're going through a bunch of reverberations. But the conventional wisdom was that the world was going to run out of energy, and certainly the United States was going to run out of energy, and we were just going to be completely dependent on foreign sources of supply, and foreign sources not from people that were viewed as our strategic global partners, but people that might have different ideological viewpoints than the United States. And it was a challenge for us, and that goes back to 70s, 80s, and then we were sort of in the 90s. We're going to reach peak oil. Was all the conventional wisdom that came along. If the black line on the bottom, which is the United States, you can show that steady decline that was happening all the way up through 2010. Really, that was a time frame where a lot of national policy was formed, and a lot of opinions were formed, and a lot of research was released, and a lot of scientific opinion, and a lot of conventional wisdom became this, unassailable thing, which is we are absolutely positively going to run out of energy. We're going to run out of oil. The U.S. is going to be dependent forever. We've got to completely rethink the global strategies and how we do that, because there's just no chance. And then you take a look at this line that goes straight up. Through 2014, we had the price bump, and then it takes off straight up again. And what was driving that? What was driving that was technology and open markets. That's what was driving it. It's the same thing that's lifted over 1 billion people on our planet out of poverty, has been free markets and technology. It's what it does it. And this is the thing which not anybody was predicting. And of course, a lot of this happened right here in North Dakota, because when you were able to take a resource that was formerly unavailable and make it available, and you're able to do it because of the application of technology and new approaches, that's there isn't a more powerful example of innovation than you can come up with in this line. And then what it does is we went through August, we ended up surpassing not only Saudi Arabia but Russia, the #1 oil producer in the world, and then we're also #1 in gas production as well, which is also passing Russia. So these are just, go dig around and see if you can find a research paper from 2006 or 2007, 2008 that says that this is the chart. No, because all the policies were built on it going the other way. But this is the reality of where we are today. And what is it? It's a global game changer. It changes everything. It changes how we think about how we who our strategic alliances are. It changes how we think about trade. It changes about how we think about where we spend our military spending, which has always been for the U.S. a big thing. And I think everybody in this room, you don't have to be a State Department security analyst to understand that a lot of our military spending from the 70s, through today was really about maintaining security in the Middle East and maintain the transport lines to get oil and gas to the U.S. so we could keep our economy going. That's where a lot of what we were spending on. But now, if you've got the situation where we become not only energy independent but energy dominant, it creates an opportunity for us to do the things we're doing right now, which is record employment, moving manufacturing jobs back home. And and then the low gas prices that we're going through is like a $1 trillion tax cut for the world, because people are paying less for their transportation fuels and they can spend it on other things. So it changes everything, and a lot of it goes back to places like North Dakota, where there was unavailable sources became available through the use of technology. It's a remarkable shift, and maybe only 10 or 20 years from now, when we look back, people will really be able to understand what amazing moment that we're going through right now. Just in North Dakota, this is 1.27 million barrels a day, #2 behind Texas, of course, passing California. Wasn't that hard to pass California? They were going the other way in terms of production, but this passes Alaska and other states that have been pro-energy producing states. But it's also a remarkable thing, and this is, of course, fueling when we've got a tax structure in our state where dollars come off the top and go into things like the Foundation Aid Fund, which for K-12. We went from a state that 20 years ago we were talking hundreds of millions, and now we're a state that's got over $5 billion in a trust fund for K-12 forever going forward. You know, we didn't, the legacy fund didn't exist over 10 years ago. Now we have over $5 billion in a legacy fund, which we can continue to accumulate for that time in the future when there may be different competitors or different technologies that would displace sources of revenue for the state of North Dakota that might be coming from one form of energy or another, but then we have an opportunity to protect ourselves in that future, whether that's 10 or 20 or 30 years out. Excellent planning for the future. So this is, you know, to the point now where people, I think, just, yeah, we're doing 1.2 million barrels a day. Yeah, it's like, what's the big deal? I had an opportunity a couple weeks ago to go to the Midwest Governors Conference where we met with Japanese governors and the Japanese ambassador. And I thought, hey, I'm going to be having dinner with some Japanese governors. I should just check before I slide in here, you know, how much oil that Japan produces a day and just refresh myself on Japan. So Japan's got 146,000 square miles. It's just roughly twice the size of North Dakota. North Dakota is 71,000 square miles. They have 127 million people. 127 million people. We've got 755,000. They have 860 times more people per square mile than we do. You know how much oil they produce a day? 4,000 barrels a day of oil. They are completely dependent and this is the home of Toyota and Honda, Lexus. I mean, you name all the auto manufacturers. This is a country that loves automobiles as much as we do. And they're driving all those automobiles with oil that gets shipped into their country every day from another place. And then you see, and they have not, you know, they don't even have enough food to feed 127 million people. So think about if you're in charge of a country where you're completely dependent on some other folks for your oil and your food, and think about your strategic options versus if you're a country like the United States, which is now a net exporter. We can now export energy because we're producing what we need. And then we've got and then when we produce more food than we can produce. The strategic options for our country are incredible, and then you couple that with the lowest unemployment since 1969, and you know the future would seem quite bright in terms of the strategic options that we have as a country. We're also, you know, blessed. You know, we've won, as I said a few weeks ago, we've won the geological lottery, and you know, some of it I'm looking at right here. We've got this amazing water resource called the Missouri River. We've got these, you know, huge, you know, centuries worth of coal resources in our state. We've got, every time the Geological Survey comes up with an estimate of what our oil and gas reserves are, they have to raise them because it goes up, and it goes up by billions every time they adjust them because of the proven ability of the private sector to be able to extract that. And so we've got, and then we have wind. We have amazing wind. So between wind and hydro and coal and oil and gas, and small population and smart people and a great private sector, I mean, we are literally, I mean, some of these Japanese governors, the problems that those guys had, they're talking to me, they just couldn't believe it. I mean, you've got that, and that, and that, and that, you know, and all that food and all this stuff, whatever, and how many people? You know, it's like, it's like on a per capita basis. I mean, we're like, I mean, I don't know, they were, they couldn't believe the riches that were sort of in our lap. And it's true, we just have to step back and have gratitude for the position we're in, and then we just have to be smart enough to execute against being in one of the best positions of any state that's ever been created. And this is, I think, again, I was talking about coal there. This was taken earlier this year when Secretary Perry was here, along with Congressman Craver and Senator Hoeven. You know, but always impressive to see what we're accomplishing there and the great innovations that the coal industry has made. I mean, the coal industry has eliminated virtually every possible challenge they've had over the last 30 years through investment, until, you know, they ran into the thing where we decided carbon was this thing that was awful. Last time I checked, plants love carbon, and I'm so excited because there's more innovation that's occurring here around, I know there's some people in this room that are working on a greenhouse project where we can take the carbon that comes off the coal plants, comes off an ethanol plant, put it into a greenhouse, take some of that gas we have, you know, that we're flaring off, use that to heat the greenhouses. I mean, this is not crazy time. This is like absolutely positively an idea that the numbers are going to work out on, because if you got free heat and free carbon, you know, I was just at a greenhouse at one of our universities the other day, And they were talking about that the early studies they're doing is that certain plants, do 2 to 3 times better with an enhanced amount of carbon in the greenhouse. We got the ag research universities right here, and we've got the energy right here. We could do this. I mean, take a trip to Iceland. They're growing all their own food. They're not shipping in, blueberries from Chile like we do every January, on some ship, something. I mean, go to the grocery store. Look where the food's coming from that you're eating. Here in North Dakota, we have an opportunity to do some amazing things with all the synergies and innovations between the ag and energy industries. And of course, wind industry has been incredible. A lot of the same folks that have been in producing electricity out of coal have diversified into wind. We got great wind resources, and away we go. We export a ton of wind. We've got more transmission capacity to export it out of here, and we've got even more opportunity to produce more electricity with some of the gas that we're producing. We have gas plants because we do have some export capacity, and we have export capacity on wires with electrons, and we can thank the wind industry for that, because the wind industry growing has helped create the export capacity on the transmission to other markets that need it. This administration, I'd say you all know this, but I mean, again, Brent and I are grateful to have an opportunity where if we have an issue that we want to work through, we actually now have an administration that actually believes that the state should have a voice in how they regulate themselves. To have an administration that understands that the states, at the founding of this country, the states created the federal government and not the other way around. The 13 states got together, had their little convention and said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to create this thing called this federal system, and we're going to put a bunch of guardrails on it, because we know that the state approach works, and we've got a group now in the federal government that understands that, which is fantastic. But having Sonny Perdue, Ryan Zinke, Secretary Perry, Elaine Chao with FAA, all here, and FAA of course controls FERC, and I know that we've got people in the room that understand that. So I mean, it's fantastic to have this kind of relationships with these folks that are, and when we're in the meetings, these aren't photo ops. When we're in the meetings with them or with the White House, every meeting I've been in, which has now been dozens of meetings with cabinet levels or the White House directly, they really want to know what the states think. They really want to know what they can do to help the economy grow faster and to get out of the way of the states. It's a genuine, doesn't matter whether it's prison reform, doesn't matter if it's the First Lady at the White House 3 times already for things related to addiction and recovery. They want to know what the states are doing, and it's a fantastic opportunity for us to have a clear, so instead of just having to fight federal regulation, we actually can have to get rid of that, hey, we got to fight what they're, we're the victim and they're trying to oppress us with these regulations. We have to get our hat on, because if we've got great policy ideas, they want to hear it. We have an opportunity to keep leading with ideas, and we should keep doing that. So a year ago at the Petroleum Council, I put out this crazy thing where I said, hey, I think we could get to 2 million barrels. A year ago, that wasn't that popular. Well, I think it was oddly received, because people were like, hey, we're struggling to recover from the crash and trying to get things going. And we're hoping to get back to 1 million. Now we're talking about 2 million. I wasn't just trying to be completely provocative. I was doing it because, having talked to people in industry, I saw that some of the people in industry were getting 3 times as much production out of a well in 2017 as they did in 2014. Well, if one company had figured it out, what if the rest of them figured it out? I also was seeing that, from the work that Lynn Helms and his team was doing, that as we were approaching the same levels of production, we were getting twice as much gas as we did in 2014. So I knew we had issues there that were potential constraints. So we put out the challenge. Now we're racing our way there. And so the last few weeks ago at the Petroleum Council, we said 2 million barrels. Okay, now that everybody thinks it's doable, what it's going to take? What are the constraints we're going to have to get over to try to get there? And the constraints are substantial for us to try to do this. And some of it fits right back into the Main Street Initiative, because it has to do with workforce and it has to do with smart, efficient infrastructure. And I'm going to talk about those too. And workforce is the biggest constraint we have right now. We know that there's been a remarkable $1.7 billion of capital that's come into our state, that's come in to help build new gas plants in our state. And those gas plants, some of them are not coming online as fast as we'd like them to. And why is that? Is because they can't get the workforce. You know, the pipe fitters, sheet metal, just basic, you know, construction skilled labor, they can't get the workforce to do it. And then what about, you take a look at our report, we're coming in on close to 1,000, you know, drilled but uncompleted wells. 986, I think, or some number like that is where we're at at the end of August. Think of that like 1,000 businesses that can't open because they don't have the workforce to open the door. Because every time one of those things opens, it is, it's, you know, economic activity, and it is economic activity that more directly than anything in agriculture, you know, flows directly into the coffers of the state, with, you know, 10% of that coming in, and it goes into all these things which are funding both long-term and short-term capability. So the workforce is actually the biggest gating factor on our economy right now. We put together, we revitalized, reinvigorated the what was the governor's workforce council, 32 members across labor, across academia, across K-12, across industry. Those folks have been meeting diligently. Labor commissioner and also serving in the dual role as head of job service, Michelle Comer, has been doing a fantastic job. They're closing in on preparing their report that they're going to deliver back to the governor's office with dozens of recommendations. And on the, you know, looking at the preliminary aspects of what they're doing, I think they are going to have, they've got dozens of great ideas on how we can move things forward. One of which simultaneously, we just got a $450,000 grant from the federal government over 3 years to take a look at licensure review. This is an area where we have, in specific cases like military personnel moving to one of our either Grand Forks or Minot Air Force Base, they have a trailing spouse. Trailing spouses could be skilled. They could be skilled in law enforcement. They could be a skilled nurse. They could be a addiction counselor. You name it, across the 80 licenses that we give in our state of North Dakota. In many of those, I'll go as far as say a majority of the 80 different places where we license people in North Dakota, if somebody moves here, they can't work unless they go through a bunch of retraining. And so I'd like to think that we could be smart about looking at other states and offering reciprocity. Utah just passed a bill that makes them more military friendly than we are. That we know that the federal government is going to be, when they're looking at the potential base closures, military friendliness for workforce is going to be one of the things that's moved up high on their checklist, because workforce is an issue for everybody in the country. How can it not be an issue for everyone in the country? It's an issue for the state of North Dakota. It's an issue for every one of your businesses. It's an issue for the federal government. It's an issue for the military. And so being friendly towards workforce matters in a time where this is the first time in the history of our country we have more people looking for jobs than we have jobs available. So Utah's bill, if you have any license in any other state and you're married to a military personnel, you move to Utah, your license comes with you, and you can teach, you can be a nurse, you can be an addiction counselor on the license you have from the other state. Simple, easy thing to do, and you know, we need to take a hard look at stuff like that, because we can't have people in North Dakota sitting on the sidelines when we've got 30,000 jobs open in our state. Transforming education is another piece that we have to do, K through 12 and higher ed. We've got task force working on both of these, but we've got to get a much tighter link between K-12 and career and technical education. Some places we do a great job, like right here on this campus. Way to go, Larry, and BSC and Bismarck Public Schools and the Career Academy. Great example, fantastic academy, but we need it. We need it in Dickinson. We need it in Fargo. We need it in Williston. We need it all over the state, because we've got, you know, too many kids that are sub-performing against their own potential career goals. And when we got 40% of the jobs that are available that are high-paying, skilled jobs, but they might require a certificate, but they don't require a 4-year degree. We also culturally, as parents, have to let go of the idea that the only path to success in life is a 4-year degree, because if you looked at the numbers right now, what a 4-year degree that takes you 5 years or 6 years to get, what it may get you, it may not get you more success, it may give you more college debt. It may not get you a better job, it may not make you happier, it may not give you a better spouse, it may not be anything. But we all think that it's that you know, 4-year degree equals success, and we just have to unlearn. As adults, we have to unlearn that because we're creating a culture where a lot of kids are choosing paths that may not be the right path for them at a time when there are so many paths and so many other ways to learn. And I'm not talking about guys that are just doing auto mechanics. I'm talking about somebody invests, you know, 5 years to get a 4-year degree in computer science. And when they graduate, they know a lot about how computers got built in the 1980s, but then the company that hires them, the leading tech companies, got to send them to school for 16 weeks to teach them how to code in the current languages that the company is using. And meanwhile, they could have skipped the 5 years in the college debt and just gone to a 6-week coding school and got the same job for $72,000. That's a real example. So it's like, you know, why do we just again have to unlearn some of the approaches. And that's going to take change by us culturally, but it's also going to take change on the institutions. But we spend billions of dollars in North Dakota between K-12 and higher ed. We spend billions of dollars, and then we're not producing the students that can fill the jobs even in our own state. And if 100% of the graduates had the right degrees and stayed, we still wouldn't have enough people to fill the jobs in our state. So we have to have an approach that includes net in-migration. We have to become a state that is friendly, welcoming, and inclusive to people that want to come here to our and work here. And we're getting there. I mean, Watford City had added 330 new kids to their school district this year. That would place them, of the 180 school districts in North Dakota, the 330 in growth in Watford City would make that. The growth is the 40th largest school district. We have 140 school districts in the state with less than 330 people in K-12, and that's what Watford added. But they've got over 20 different languages being spoke at the Watford school right now. Fargo's school district and West Fargo, between the two of them, those two represent over 20% of the K-12 students in the state. They've got over 60 different countries represented in there. Watford City has got somebody in that K-12 system, which is now 1,800 kids. They've got someone there from every state in the country, plus the 20 language groups. I mean, so you know, the diversity that didn't exist when some of us were growing up in small town North Dakota is arriving, and we as the adults have to be as prepared as the kids that are in those schools for, you know, being welcoming and inclusive and getting people to actually stay here. It's going to take private-public partnerships. We can't solve the K-12 and the higher ed solutions just with more state funding. It's got to be in conjunction with private industry, with our research universities, with private industry, with our CTE. There's going to be lots of opportunities for us to really enhance the connection between private industry and CTE, and getting our CTE and our 2 years tighter linked to our K-12. Smart, efficient infrastructure is another thing that's holding us back, and we have to really think about this. Some of this in the industry has to do with takeaway capacity, whether that's with oil, whether it's gas utilization, whether it's gas pipelines. We know how hard it is to get infrastructure built in this country. I mean, under the current, you know, political environment that we're in, I think it would be safe to say no one could get the interstate highway system built today. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, you know, trying to get the easements to build that. I mean, could you get a transcontinental railroad built today? I mean, we were a country that really advanced ourselves versus the rest of the world because we embraced building networks of infrastructure, and now we were at a spot where we somehow have changed some attitudes about that. So this takes more work on behalf of the private sector, take collaboration to do that. But on the gas utilization, there are some other opportunities here that we have, because even though we set some goals 3 years ago and said we're going to go from 85 to 88% capture, when that goal was set, I don't think anybody that was in the room 3 years ago knew that we were going to have more than 2 or 3 times as much gas produced in a ratio of gas per oil that we have today. Because if we were producing at the same ratio that we did years ago, we would have all the gas capture we needed. We'd be set. But instead, we've got this gas-oil ratio, which has been escalating. And so now we're chasing this thing. So every month we set a record in terms of the billions of cubic feet that we capture. So we set a new record every month, but keep chasing a percentage. So we have to do a better job of being articulate about the geography, because we have some places in the state that are above the 88%. We have some places that are below. Some of the places that are below include places where we've got BLM and BIA land. We've talked with the senior leaders at BIA and BLM, Because if we can't get an easement, or if it takes 12 or 18 months to get an easement to put a gas gathering line through federal property or through tribal lands, then we're going to have a gas flaring problem. And so some of it is the capturing at that level. In some cases, as I said, it's a workforce issue that relates to this. And in some places, the Industrial Commission just recently spent some dollars on a research with EERC, and we're trying to take a look at, can we take produced gas and put it right back down into appropriate geology, 6,000 feet below the ground, and store it the way people store produced gas all over in 38 different states? Process, the way they store processed gas, can we store produced gas? And if we can do that, and we can do it right on the well site, this could really help us during this period where we're trying to play catch up with the gas utilization infrastructure. But going back to the export opportunities, we were a country that was, all focused on, we got to import energy. When I'm talking to the ambassador of Japan about their energy issues, he basically said, look, if there was a gas pipeline from North Dakota running to the West Coast, we would take all the LNG, we'd take the next 20 years of LNG. They would love to have, instead of having 90, whatever percent, 95% dependence on the Middle East, they would like to spread their sources of supply around. They would love to be buying from North Dakota. They'd love to be buying from the U.S. But, so then if it was just, straight free market without, all the challenges, the capital would flow. The capital might even come from Japan. Japan would love to pay for the foreign direct investment. Instead of building a factory, a Toyota plant in Indiana, they'd like to put in a pipeline in North America to get the gas from here to there. So how does that happen in this world? So we have to keep thinking about how do we create the solutions that could exist for this, because we've got products that people want. They want our food, they want our energy, and there's an opportunity for us to do this. One of the things that is working under Secretary Zinke is the Department of Interior created the state-federal partnership on the Royalty Policy Committee. Lieutenant Governor Brent Sanford was appointed to that. Lynn Helms is also serving on that. And this group started meeting last February, with people from all over, tribal, state, local, regulatory agencies, meeting all over, big group of people. Say big group of people, federal thing, probably not going to work, whatever. Lynn starts going to these meetings, and Brent last February, they came up with 18 recommendations. 5 of them have already been implemented by the federal government. And there's some other ones that are in queue that are actually happening. We actually have federal government, it's not just talk, they're actually implementing state-driven innovation. And it's not just all repealing regulations. Some of these things are new approaches, but it's fantastic. So last week, Monday, I became the 1-year head. They alternate which governors chair the Interstate Oil and Gas Producing States Commission. And so I had the honor of being asked to serve as the president or the chairman of the Interstate Oil and Gas Commission. At that kickoff last week, we said, hey, this is working with energy, but we could actually use one with the Department of Energy, because there's a lot of things that go on here in terms of what energy is doing. Let's create the equivalent of that Royalty Policy Committee, so we can go have some discussions with these guys about coal and other things, transportation, whether this has to do with conditioning of oil, whether it has to do with pipeline infrastructure, different things that we can do, but let's create one at the transportation and then also at EPA. So we had deputies from all of these agencies. All 4 of those agencies were out there. I had a chance to have lunch with them. We laid out this idea. They're going back. They're going to look at what the Interior Department was doing. I think we got a real chance of this suggestion taking hold soon. And maybe we can see that same kind of interaction between the private sector with all of you direct with these agencies in a way where we can start steering some things that make sense for the country. North Dakota is not a footnote. This is a big deal. A number of studies have come up that still have us as #1 in clean air, #1 in water. We know that the reclamation that our coal industry has done for the last 5-6 decades is bar none the best of any in the country. It was great to have a chance to show some of that to Secretary Perry when he was here. But this is the challenge for everybody here is how do we go forward where we maintain our commitment to having the great quality of life, which includes clean water and clean air and being on the clean water and clean air team. How do we do that? At the same time, we continue to build and innovate around all of the amazing energy resources that we have in our incredible all of the above state. So with that, I just want to take away the challenge to all of you is continuing to think about ideas where if you had less regulation, how could you peel those dollars off and put them towards innovation? Because whether it's pipeline safety, like we challenged the industry a year ago, we got everybody together and said, how can we move towards a world with zero spills? If we're going to have 0 people killed in plane crashes, why don't we adopt some of the same approaches that industry as the FAA has used, and why can't we move towards a world that's, people say it's impossible, but how many spills are enough? If it was in your backyard, how many spills would be acceptable? I think the answer would be 0, right? It's fine, it happens someplace else, but not in my backyard. If the answer is 0, then let's figure out a way to get it done with all the new technology that we have. And there's amazing things that are happening on that front, and a lot of research we continue to do. Same thing with the gas capture, same thing with the infrastructure, same thing with the workforce. We can just keep innovating. And that's a wonderful thing. So with that, I wanted to say again, thank you for those of you that have invested in North Dakota from the private sector. Thank you for your investments in your people and in the work that you do. And for those that put on the conference, thanks for inviting both Brent and I to have an opportunity to present today. And Larry, BSC, thanks again for hosting at this beautiful location. And to everybody on serving on the EmPower Commission, thank you. Sponsored the conference, thank you. Thanks for listening. To the Commerce team that's here and everybody else that's working to try to advance things and move things forward. Randy, I see Randy over here. Thank you, Randy, for everything you and the PSC are doing. We got a great team across North Dakota working to help make sure that we can be the very best at what we do. We want to reach our fullest potential, and we can only do that when we work together. So thank you very much and have a great day.